Chapter 1. The Water Pitcher. For 2 days, I poured water for the men deciding whether to bury me. Nobody knew. That was the point. A service apron makes you invisible in a way a pitch deck never does. Investors watch the slide, never the hand refilling the glass beside it. They will say anything in front of the girl with the water pitcher, because a water pitcher is furniture that walks. I learned more about who these people really were in 2 days of refilling their coffee than I learned in 12 years of every term sheet I was handed and told to sign fast and not read twice. This morning in the grand ballroom, the man about to lowball my life's work for the price of its office chairs looked straight through me and said, "Sweetheart, another still water, no ice, and try not to hover." I filled his glass to exactly the line. They had spent 2 days trying to impress the anonymous lead investor of Halcyon, the one whose signature every deal in the room needed. He never arrived, because he had been pouring their water the whole time. And he was me. The Cordell Grand Ballroom held 400 people at capacity, and at 5:52 in the morning, it held 3. Me, a vacuum humming somewhere behind the stage curtain, and a housekeeper I never saw, only heard. The wheels of her cart clicking over the seam where carpet met the parquet floor they'd never once used for dancing. I came in before the caterers because I had a key I wasn't supposed to have and a reason nobody would think to ask about, which is the only kind of access worth having. I set my pitcher on the service station and stood in the gray light and listened to the room breathe. You learn a room in the dark. In the daylight, it lies to you, all lanyards and handshakes, and a man from a growth fund telling a founder he just wants to help you win. And you can't hear anything true over the noise of everyone performing their own worth. But at 6 in the morning, the ballroom is honest. The fluorescent tubes behind the frosted ceiling panels haven't warmed up yet. They hum on the edge of a headache, a flat electrical note under everything, and the coffee urns aren't lit. And the chairs are still stacked, and the whole enormous room smells of 2 things and only 2. Yesterday's coffee gone cold in the carpet, and printer toner from the business center down the hall, where the term sheets get run at dawn so the ink is dry by breakfast. That is the smell of my whole adult life. Cold coffee and warm toner. A deal being printed before anyone's had time to read it. I have a thing I believe, and I've never said it out loud to a living soul, so I'll say it here where only you can hear it. You find out what a person is worth at 6 in the morning in an empty ballroom, when the cameras are off and the only witness is the one refilling the water. Everything else is theater. The panels, the man on the main stage in the $4,000 sweater talking about founder empathy, that's the show. The truth happens in the margins, when a managing director thinks the only other person in the room is staff, and staff doesn't count, so he says the thing he actually means. I've spent a long time in those margins, holding a pitcher, and I've gotten very good at hearing the truth when it doesn't know it's being heard. I keep a ledger. Not on paper. There are no paper things at this summit that don't eventually cross a shredder I also empty. I keep it behind my eyes, a 2-column thing my grandmother would have recognized. 1 column for the ones who treated the powerless like they were still worth something. 1 column for the ones who didn't. Pass. Fail. That's the whole grade. My grandmother June used to say you could learn a man's entire character from how he treated the person who couldn't do anything for him. Watch what a man does when he thinks the deal is already done, she'd tell me, wiping the counter that was never dirty because wiping it was how she thought. That's who he is. The rest is sales. She's gone now, 12 years gone, but I carry her ledger, and this week I've been filling it in 1 glass of still water, no ice at a time. I'll show you how the grading works. First morning, breakfast service. A senior partner from one of the marquee funds, he'll get his page, snapped his fingers at me without looking, the way you'd snap for a dog you were annoyed to still own. Didn't break his sentence about capital efficiency. And when I refilled his cup, he moved his elbow into the space where my hand had to be, just enough to make me work around him, just enough to remind me which of us the room was for. Fail. Line 1. That same morning, a young woman 2 tables over touched my sleeve as I passed and said, "You've been on your feet since 5, haven't you? Sit for a second if Arthur's not looking." And when I said I couldn't, she said, "Then at least let me hold that while you fix your shoe." And she held my pitcher. A founder at a summit, quietly deciding whether her company lived or died, held a caterer's water pitcher so I could kneel and fix a shoe that didn't need fixing, because she'd seen me limping and decided a stranger's comfort was worth more than looking important. Pass. Underlined. That's the whole game. and you'd be amazed. No, you wouldn't. Not by the end of this. How consistent people are. The man who snaps his fingers at the water girl is, without exception, the same man who will explain to a founder that her 4 years of 18-hour days are worth the price of the assets realistically, and mean the office chairs. The young woman's name was Aisha Khan. I knew it before she ever told it to me, the way I knew a great many things at that summit that I had no business on paper knowing. She ran a company called Sable, clean energy load balancing software, unglamorous, essential. The kind of thing that doesn't make a headline but quietly keeps the grid from falling over. Genuinely good, and therefore genuinely undervalued, in a room full of people who'd rather fund a fifth food delivery app. She was 30. She had 11 employees who trusted her. She'd built it honestly, without cutting the corners everyone told her she'd have to cut, and that honesty was the exact quality that had marked her, in the eyes of the men running the summit, as prey. I watched her that first day the way you watch a version of yourself you can't warn. She still believed the room was what it said it was. She still thought that if she just explained the metrics honestly enough, the people with the money would see the value and do the right thing. She thought the deal would go to whoever deserved it. I used to think that too. I built something real once, the same clean way, and it cost me everything I had, including my name. 12 years ago, I made something the world should have kept. And men in a room a lot like this one took it from me at 6 in the morning with a fountain pen and a smile, told me it was just business, and told everyone else I was difficult. That's all you get for now. The rest has teeth. But watching Aisha explain her honest numbers to men who'd already decided what she was worth, that was the closest I'd come in 12 years to the exact temperature of my own grief. Cold. Very cold. And under the cold, an old machinery starting up, the one I'd built in silence. The one nobody in that ballroom knew existed. Her name badge said, Billionaire, Sable, Founder. Mine said a name that isn't mine, in a font the catering company chose, on a lanyard that told the truth about exactly one thing, that I did not matter. I wore it every day and felt its small nothing weight against my chest, and every time someone read it and looked back down at their phone, I thought, good, read it. Dismiss me, that's the whole plan. Because here's the other thing my grandmother taught me, the darker cousin of the first. You can't see who someone really is until they've decided you're no one. The moment a person concludes you don't count is the moment they stop performing, and the moment they stop performing is the only moment you ever get the truth. I have paid a great deal of money, more than anyone at that summit could have imagined the water girl controlled, for the privilege of being decided a no one. It's the only honest seat there is. Nia found me at the service station around 7, first day, hip-checking the swinging door open with a tray of pastries on one forearm, and clocked my face in half a second the way she's been clocking my face since we were both 20 and broke and folding napkins at a different hotel for a different set of men who thought we were furniture. You've got your murder face, she said low. The one where you're being very calm about something. What'd you see? Nia Adebayo is the only person at that summit who knows a version of me closer to the real one. Not the whole truth, not yet. But she's known me long enough to know that when I go still and pleasant, something underneath has gotten very loud. She's the sharpest person in any room she's ever walked into, and every fund in that ballroom looked straight through her exactly the way they looked through me. It's a specific kind of stupidity, and I've built a great deal on it. Table 4, I said. The one who snaps. Nothing you could put in a complaint, I'm guessing. Nia memorizes rooms. It's a survival skill on the floor. That's what makes it good data. I refilled my pitcher from the station tap, watching the level rise. How's the founder's floor? Her face changed. Just slightly. Bad, she said. There's a mood. You know how you can feel when a room's already been sold and the people in it are the only ones who don't know? I knew exactly. The founder's floor was the ballroom's poor cousin. A function room down the hall with worse coffee and no natural light, where the builders sat, waiting to be told what their lives were worth by people who'd never built anything but a carried interest structure. Engineers with laptop stickers. A woman who'd bootstrapped a medical records tool for rural clinics. 2 brothers with a logistics company and matching exhausted eyes. Aisha at a corner table, holding office hours for founders even younger and more frightened than she was, because that's who she is. These were the stakes, not the term sheets, the people. Every one of them had a thing they'd built and people who depended on it, and a belief that if you make something good and true, the world eventually rewards you for it. The summit existed to relieve them of that belief as cheaply as possible. I'd known that for months, known it before I ever put on the apron, which is a thing I still can't tell you the whole of. But knowing a thing in the abstract and standing 3 feet from it while it happens are different weights of knowing, and by the second morning the second kind had settled onto me like a coat I couldn't take off. Here is what I heard on the second morning. It's the thing that turned a rumor into a countdown. I was resetting the water in the director's suite, a smaller room off the main ballroom, glass-walled, where the deals that mattered actually got shaped before they got performed on stage. 2 men. One I'll leave in shadow a while longer, the smooth one, the one whose name is the whole spine of this story. The other was Arthur Sterling, who ran the summit, charming as a game show host on the main stage, and, in a glass room he thought was empty except for the help, a different animal entirely. Neither of them stopped talking when I came in. Neither looked up. I was furniture. I refilled 2 glasses and emptied a wastebasket I didn't need to empty, and I listened. "So the mechanism's clean," Arthur was saying. "We don't acquire anything. We position it as a platform. The founders think they're joining something. Meridian rolls up the whole cohort under one entity, cheap, cost basis near 0 on the good ones, and the restructuring happens after the ink's dry. Teams get streamlined. The founders get a nice title with no authority and a vesting cliff they'll never reach. We keep the tech. And the numbers work at that basis," the smooth one said. Not a question. A man confirming a temperature. "The numbers are obscene at that basis. That's the point of doing it as a cohort. 1 at a time you're negotiating, 12 at once, on a deadline, with everyone else signing. Nobody negotiates. Nobody reads. They sign fast and don't read twice." Sign fast and don't read twice. I have heard those exact words before. 12 years ago, across a table, from a man who was smiling. I kept my face pleasant and set the wastebasket down without a sound and felt the old machinery drop into a lower, steadier gear. "The Sable girl's a problem," Arthur added, almost as an afterthought. "Nair. She's rallying them, telling the little ones to read the terms, get counsel, not sign in the room. If she keeps that up, she poisons the cohort." "Then she's not in the cohort," the smooth one said. That was all. Said the way you'd swat something off a sleeve. And they moved on to logistics, and I moved on to the next room with my pitcher. And I understood several things at once. The walls of the box I stood in. The roll-up was real. Not a rumor on the founder's floor. Real, named, mechanical. Meridian. The buyer of the whole cohort. My company. The one I ran under my own founder name. The one they knew as one more struggling startup led by one more forgettable woman named Clara was in that cohort. So was Aisha's. So were the medical records woman and the exhausted brothers and every laptop sticker engineer down the hall. The plan was to strip them for the price of the office chairs and fire the people who built them, and it was going to happen in this building. Fast. And Aisha Khan had already been quietly reclassified from founder to problem. And it was going to happen soon. That was the other wall, the one with the clock on it. The summit closed on the final day with the Founders Prize and the flagship signing. Media invited. The marquee deals countersigned and announced as a new era for founders. And every marquee deal in the room required one signature that wasn't in the room. The flagship structure ran on Halcyon money, Halcyon Capital, the quiet fund everyone spent 2 days trying to impress, whose anonymous lead investor was the sealed keystone of the whole arch. No Halcyon countersignature. No close. The chairman would call for Halcyon's principal to send a representative to countersign, and once that pen touched the paper, the cohort was gutted, the builders streamlined, the tech walked out under Meridian's name. 36 hours. That was the gap between the glass room and the pen touching the paper. 36 hours until the founder's floor got relieved of its last illusion, at wholesale. Sophia Reyes swept past the director's suite while I was still standing there, saw me through the glass, and made a small circular gesture that meant remove. The water situation, I'd heard her call me the day before, to an associate, not lowering her voice. Somebody managed the water situation, she keeps materializing. Sophia ran investor relations like a bouncer running a velvet rope, and she decided within 4 seconds of meeting me that I was an obstacle between important people and their comfort. She held the door open and looked at the middle distance over my shoulder and said, "We're done in here. Out." "Of course," I said, and gathered my pitcher and passed close enough to read the pass clipped to her jacket. "All access" in red. And I thought, you have no idea what all access means. I do. And mine is quieter than yours. Fail. Sophia Reyes. Line 1. It would be easy to make them cartoons, and cartoons are for people who've never actually been robbed. Arthur Sterling did not think of himself as a villain. He thought of himself as a realist, he'd have told you, sincerely over a good dinner, that he was doing the founders a favor, that most of them would fail anyway, that a clean exit at a low number was kinder than a slow death. That's the thing about the men who take everything from you. They almost never think they're taking. They think they're pricing. And that self-image is exactly the crack you slip the blade into, because a man who's sure he's the reasonable one in the room will keep talking long after he should have gone quiet. He'll explain himself right into the record. I was counting on that. I'd been counting on it for a long time. I should tell you about the signature because it's going to matter more than anything, and I want it in your hands early, the way it was in mine. Every deal Halcyon touches carries the same fingerprint. There's a clause, specific, elegant, and no other fund writes it, because no other fund has any reason to protect the person on the other side of the table. A founder protective provision, a floor, a hard limit on how far a down round can strip the person who built the thing. In the trade, the few who've seen it call it the Brooks Clause, after nobody they've ever met, because the fund's principal is sealed and no one has ever put a face to the name. They think it's a lawyer's affectation, a quirk, a signature move by some cautious, anonymous whale who likes founders more than is rational. They don't know it's a scar with a serial number. They don't know that 12 years ago there was a woman who begged for exactly that clause in a room a lot like this one, and was laughed at, and had her company taken because there was no floor to stand on when the down round came. They don't know she survived, and built a fund in silence, and wrote her own floor into every deal she'd ever touch again. They don't know the clause has a name because it has a person, and the person has been in the building for 2 days holding a water pitcher. They will find out, but not for 36 hours, and not from me, from the paper, from the one signature the whole summit was holding its breath for. The second night after service, I stood alone in the ballroom again while the cleaners moved in, and looked at the head table where the flagship signing would happen, the good pens laid out already, the leather folios, the little brass nameplates for the men who'd take their bows. There was a water glass someone had left half drunk on a stack of draft term sheets, and it had sweated a perfect ring onto the top page, blurring the ink of a number that represented somebody's whole life going for the price of the chairs. I looked at that ring for a long time. The fluorescent tubes hummed their headache note. Somewhere, a service cart wheel squeaked down a corridor and went quiet. The room smelled of cold coffee and toner, the smell of my whole life, the smell of a deal being printed before anyone's read it. I picked up the glass and wiped the ring off the number with the corner of my apron, the way my grandmother wiped a counter that was never dirty. Not to save the deal, to see the number clearly. You have to see the number clearly before you decide what to do about it. Then I set the glass down exactly where it had been, because I am not a woman who leaves marks she doesn't mean to leave. And I ran the ledger one more time, all the way down, every name, pass and fail, and let myself feel the full weight of it for exactly as long as it took to stop feeling it. Downstairs, on the founder's floor, 11 people trusted Aisha Khan. Aisha trusted that honesty would be rewarded. 12 companies' worth of builders trusted that the room was what it said it was. My own company sat in the cohort like all the rest, indistinguishable, forgettable, exactly as I'd needed it to be. They had 36 hours to decide the fate of the only thing I'd ever built twice. I had 10 years of practice deciding things in rooms where no one saw me. Chapter 2. Pass/fail. The second morning I kept a ledger no one could see, not on paper. Paper can be found, and I had learned a long time ago that the only records that survive are the ones kept behind the eyes. So I carried it there, a running column of names, and beside each name a single word. Pass. Fail. I graded them the way my grandmother had taught me to grade a customer who thought the deal was already done, by what they did when they believed no one who mattered was in the room. June Brooks ran a hardware store the size of a 2-car garage, And she used to say you could learn a man's whole character in the 90 seconds after he decided he'd already won. She was right about that. She was right about most things. She just never met people like these. By 6:14, the ballroom was mine and the cleaning crew's. The chandeliers dimmed to a brown hum, the carpet still holding the pattern of yesterday's shoes. I moved down the head table, refilling the water carafes to exactly the line, squaring the notepads, wiping the sweat rings the pitchers left on the mahogany. You find out what a person is worth at 6 in the morning in an empty ballroom, when the cameras are off and the only witness is the one refilling the water. That was my thesis. I'd had 10 years to test it, and it had never once failed me. The first name I graded that day walked in at 6:40. Aisha Khan doesn't see me. Nobody saw me. That was the entire architecture of my life just then. But she wasn't looking through me either, which is a different thing. She came in alone with a laptop bag and the particular posture of a founder who hadn't slept, shoulders set against a weight she was trying not to name. She was maybe 28. She had built something in the health logistics space that was, from what I'd overheard at the coffee station, genuinely good. The rare kind of good that doesn't need a story wrapped around it because the numbers tell the story themselves. Which, in a room like this, made her pray. She set up at the far end and started rehearsing under her breath, and I did what furniture does. I refilled the carafe near her and lingered, invisible, listening. A second founder found her 20 minutes later, a kid named Leo, younger than her, running some inventory tool, and he was gray-faced with the specific panic of a man holding a term sheet he'd been told to sign fast. I know that gray. I wore it once. He slid the pages across to her because she was the only person in the building who'd been kind to him, and he asked her quietly whether the terms were normal. They were not normal. I could read the shape of it from 4 feet away, upside down, in the low light. I can read a cap table the way other people read a clock. It's the one gift they never managed to take from me, and what I saw was a liquidation preference stacked 3 deep, a pay-to-play ratchet, and a board provision that handed control to the investor the instant the company so much as breathed wrong. It was the machine that had eaten me 12 years ago, retooled and repainted. It was designed to look like rescue and function like a repossession. Aisha read it slowly. Her face did a thing I recognized. The founder's math. The moment you calculate exactly how much of your own life you're being asked to sign away and whether you can survive saying no. Don't sign this, she told him. Quiet. No audience, no angle. This isn't an investment, Leo. This is them buying you and letting you keep the title of CEO so you'll blame yourself when they gut it. She walked him through it clause by clause, the ratchet, the preference, the control provision, patient as a teacher. And then she did the thing that decided her grade. She said, I got offered nearly the same paper on Tuesday, from the same people. I turned it down. I'd rather stay small and mine than get big and theirs. And she gave the kid the name of a founder-friendly clause to demand instead. A control carve-out, a protective provision that kept the builder in the builder's chair. She described, almost exactly, the Brooks Clause. She didn't know that's what it was called. Almost nobody did. It's a specific, unglamorous piece of structure, a founder protective provision, elegant if you care about that sort of thing, that a certain quiet fund had started slipping into its term sheets years ago, and which the smart founders had begun to whisper about and copy without knowing where it came from. It has a particular shape, that clause. It gives away nothing that costs a fair investor anything, and it takes away the one instrument a predatory one needs, the trapdoor, the provision that lets control fall to the money the moment the founder is weakest. Lawyers who'd never met each other had started asking for that carve-out, the one the good funds use, and none of them could tell you which fund started it. That was by design, too. It was mine. It was my signature. I had written it into the world precisely so that a girl like Aisha, someday, in a room like this, could hand it to a boy like Leo and never know she was quoting the water pourer standing behind her. She got it slightly wrong in one place, softened the language where I'd have made it iron, and I had to hold my own mouth shut against the correction, because the correction would have been a confession. There is a specific loneliness in hearing your own work in someone else's mouth and being unable to claim it. I'd made a career of it. It doesn't get easier, it just gets familiar, which people mistake for the same thing. I filled her carafe. My hand was steady. Inside, something old and buried turned over once, hard. Pass. First name of the day. Pass. And not a soul in the building to witness it but the one holding the pitcher. The room filled after 8, and the graders came out with it. Arthur Sterling took the stage at 9 like a man stepping into warm water. He ran this summit, managing director of the host firm, master of the room, and on a stage he was genuinely gifted, the kind of charm that makes 1,000 people feel personally chosen. This, he told them, arms wide, is a summit for founders, for the builders, the dreamers who get up at 6 in the morning when no one is watching. I nearly dropped the pitcher at that. He didn't know I got up at 6 in the morning. He'd never once looked at the person who did. "We are here," he said, "to protect what you've built." 40 minutes later, I watched him protect it. I was resetting a breakout room off the main hall. Coffee service, water, the little foil-wrapped biscuits nobody eats, when Arthur came in with Sophia Reyes and didn't register me as a presence in the room. This is the part people never believe. You can stand 3 feet from powerful men and be less real to them than the furniture, because the furniture at least might get moved. Arthur dropped into a chair, dropped the stage voice with it, and the face underneath was a different animal entirely. "The Nair girl's going to be a problem," he said. "She's talking the little ones out of their deals, told the inventory kid to walk." He said it the way you'd report a leak in a roof. Sophia, head of investor relations, all sharp tailoring and sharper contempt, the woman who referred to me in earshot as the water situation, poured herself coffee I'd just made and didn't glance at the maker of it. "So we lose the inventory kid. Small position." "We don't lose anyone," Arthur said. "Julian wants the whole cohort. 12 companies, clean sweep, 1 signature at the close. He's paying the sponsorship for the whole event to make that math work, so the math is going to work." He said the name Julian, the way careful men say a name that owns them. I steer them to the table. That's the arrangement. That's what the arrangement pays for. I refilled a water glass no one had touched and let the sentence settle into the ledger behind my eyes. The whole summit. 1 buyer. 1 signature at the close. 12 companies. The founder-friendly story was a set. There was a machine behind the curtain, and it had a name that started with a D and a checkbook that had bought a 2-day theater to hide inside. "And if the Nair girl keeps talking?" Sophia asked. Arthur smiled, and it was the same smile from the stage, and that was the worst part of it. "Then we find something she did wrong." He let that sit, and then, because men like Arthur can't resist explaining their own cleverness to an audience of one who already agrees, he added, "You never expel a founder for saying no. That makes a martyr, and martyrs raise money. You expel her for something small and ugly, a leak, a number that doesn't reconcile, something that makes the other founders quietly glad she's gone so they don't have to defend her." He stirred his coffee with the little wooden stick and set it on the saucer, not the table, a tidy man. "By the close, she won't be a problem. She'll be a cautionary tale, and cautionary tales are good for discipline." I had been a cautionary tale. I knew the exact machinery of it, how they build the story around you before they need it, so that when they pull the trigger, the room has already decided you deserved it. I'd spent 12 years listening for the sound of that machine warming up again. Here it was, in a breakout room, over hotel coffee, running smooth as anything, and the man operating it thought he was alone. Fail. Arthur Sterling. Written in permanent ink behind my eyes, line by line. Charming to 1,000 people and cruel to the ones who couldn't buy back the cruelty. Fail. Sophia. I grated on the walk back to the ballroom when she caught her heel on the carpet edge, steadied herself on a service cart, my service cart, and without breaking stride, snapped at me to, "Watch where you leave that!" as if the cart had lunged at her, as if I existed only in the instant I inconvenienced her. She'd been drinking coffee I made for 2 days and had never once seen my face. Fail. An easy fail, almost a boring one. The kind of person who is cruel not out of strategy, but out of the sheer administrative convenience of never having to consider that the help is a person. Those are the ones who flinch first at the end. I filed that away too. And then, at 11, I met the brain of the whole thing. I'd heard Victor Thorne's name my entire adult life. Most of the room had. He was the star, the celebrity investor, the shark everyone flew in to impress, the man whose blessing turned a founder into a fundable name and whose disregard turned one into a cautionary tale. He came into the ballroom trailing a small weather system of handlers and a journalist, a business reporter with a recorder held up like a candle. And I watched 1,000 adults rearrange their bodies toward him without deciding to. I had a professional interest in Victor Thorne, a very old, very quiet one. I refilled the carafes along his path and made myself into nothing so I could stand close enough to hear. He was mid-performance for the reporter, gesturing at the room like a landlord. "You want to understand value?" he said. "Everyone in this business is a romantic. They fall in love with the thing, the technology, the mission, the founder's little dream." He said dream the way you'd hold up something a dog dragged in. I don't. I've never bought a dream in my life. I buy positions. A company is worth exactly what someone will pay for it. He paused, because he knew the line, he'd built a career on the line, and not 1 cent of what it's worth. The reporter wrote it down like scripture. I'd heard the line before, second-hand, years ago, said in a smaller room about a smaller company, and I had spent a decade learning precisely how much of my life it had cost. Hearing it out loud, in his actual voice, was like touching a scar and finding it still warm. Then Victor walked the reporter past a cluster of founders and did the thing that decided his grade. He stopped in front of a founder, a nervous man presenting a data tool, and, for the journalist's benefit, took the man apart. Not with cruelty exactly, with something colder, a surgeon's boredom. "This," he told the reporter loudly enough that the founder and everyone near him could hear, "is what I mean. Decent tech, wrong hands. He built it, sure, but building it is the easy part. Any monkey with a keyboard can build. The value's in knowing what to do with it, and he doesn't. So it'll get bought, and someone who understands value will make it worth something." He clapped the founder on the shoulder like a benediction. "No offense, friend, it's just math." The founder tried to smile. It didn't take. I watched a man be erased in real time, in a crowded room, and thanked for the privilege. And then Victor did the small thing that told me everything. He walked the reporter to a display, a portfolio wall, logos of companies his fund was associated with, and began narrating them as his creations. This one we turned around. This one was nothing when I found it. He said I built where I knew he meant I bought, and I bought where I meant I took, and the reporter transcribed the whole soft theft without a flicker, because who was going to correct the shark? 2 of those logos I knew the true stories of. Neither story was his. Fail. Victor Thorne. Fail so total it needed its own page. A man who took the thing off the builder and then took the credit off the theft, and called the arithmetic of it nature. I'd known his grade for 12 years. It was almost a relief to write it down. He needed water, of course he did. "Sweetheart." He didn't turn his head. He held his empty glass out into the air beside him, into the space where furniture lives. The water. Still, no ice. And when I stepped in to pour, Sophia, who had appeared at his elbow, drawn to power the way a compass finds north, put her hand flat in the air between us like a traffic officer and said, for his benefit and the reporters, "And don't hover. God, they always hover." I filled the glass to exactly the line. I want to be clear about what that costs, because the reader deserves the true weight of it and not the clean version. It costs something to be called sweetheart by the man who ended your first life and to keep your hand steady. It costs something to be waved off like a smell by a woman drinking coffee you made, in front of a journalist, in a room you could buy and sell and everyone in it, and to say nothing, and to smile the small service smile and pour to the line. It costs, and I paid it. And here is the thing they never understood about the cost. I could afford it. I had spent 10 years learning to afford exactly this. Every humiliation was a coin, and I was not spending them. I was collecting them. Victor took the glass without seeing the hand. He said to the reporter still performing, "That's the whole job, really. Knowing what a thing is worth when everyone else is sentimental about it." He drank. He set the glass down on a term sheet, Leo's term sheet, I realized. The 3-deep preference, left there for a signature, and it left a wet ring on the paper, a small, cold circle right over the clause that would have taken the kid's company. A sweat ring on a document that was already a kind of theft. I have never forgotten that ring. I collect those too. I pocketed the intel, all of it, the way you pocket loose change without looking. The whole cohort, one buyer, the name Julian, the arrangement Arthur was paid to run, the plan to find something on Aisha. I had come to this summit with one company at risk, mine, the one I was running under my own name, small and quiet and set out like bait. I was leaving this morning with the outline of a machine. There was one more name that day. I nearly missed it because he was the kind of man these rooms are built to make invisible, same as me. David Flynn ran the AV, a veteran, decades of these summits in his hands, coiling cable and taping down the seams in the carpet where a founder might trip on the way to the worst moment of their life. He'd been working the room around all of us like weather. When Sophia snapped at me about the cart, David had been 10 feet off, feeding a cable, and I'd caught him watching. Not with pity. Pity I could have refused. He watched the way a man watches someone do a hard job well. Later, near the loading dock, he handed me a bottled water from his own cooler without my asking, and said low, so it stayed between us, "You reset the whole head table this morning before the crew even clocked in. Squared every pad to the edge. Nobody in that room will notice." He almost smiled. But I noticed. You're the sharp one. He meant it. That was the thing that landed. 2 days of being sweetheart and the water situation and don't hover, and here was a tired man with cable-burned hands who'd looked at me long enough to see that I was good at something and said so and expected nothing back. He didn't know what he was looking at. He couldn't have. But he'd graded me the same way I graded everyone, at 6 in the morning when the cameras were off, and he'd passed me. "You've done rooms like this before," he said. "It wasn't a question. You move like you have. Most of the temp crew, they wait to be told. You don't. You already know where the trouble's going to be before it happens." He coiled a cable around his elbow, unhurried. "I've worked these summits 26 years. You learn to read a room by who's nervous and who isn't. The founders back there are nervous. The money's not." He glanced toward the ballroom, and something crossed his face. Not fear, something older and quieter. A thing he carried and didn't set down for strangers. "Watch the ones who aren't nervous. That's free advice." "I always do," I said, and he heard something in it, I think, because he looked at me a beat longer than the words asked for. Pass. David Flynn, the only person in the building who'd earned it by seeing me. "Something like that," I told him, and took the water, and let myself have 1 true second of being a person. Then I went back to the floor, because the machine didn't stop for tenderness, and neither could I. I stood at the side of the ballroom that night after the crowd thinned, pitcher in hand, watching Arthur Sterling laugh at something Victor said, watching Sophia orbit them, watching the reporter file a story that would tell the whole world a lie about who built what. 12 companies, one buyer with a name that started with a D, and a checkbook big enough to rent the truth for 2 days. Aisha turning down the paper that would have made her safe and poor in the eyes of the room, and grading out as the only clean thing in it. Leo's water-ringed term sheet still on the table. My own company on a list somewhere, penciled in for the clean sweep. It would have been so easy to read it as bad luck. A rough market, a hard summit, sharks being sharks. That's the story they wanted the room to swallow, and the room was swallowing it. But I don't believe in bad luck. I believe in cap tables, and cap tables don't lie. And every line I'd read that day pointed the same direction, inward, toward a single hand no one in this ballroom had put a face to yet. This wasn't the market being cruel. This was a design. Someone wanted these companies gutted badly enough to build a whole summit around it. After 10 years of silence, I decided to find out who. Chapter 3. Aster. There is a particular hour of the night in a hotel, somewhere past 2 and short of dawn, when the ballroom empties and the machines keep running anyway. The ice makers cycle. The HVAC breathes. The service corridor hums its long, fluorescent hum to nobody. I sat on an overturned milk crate in that corridor with my apron folded on my knee and my private notebook open on top of it. And I did not write anything for a long time. I only looked at the 2 names I had already written hours earlier in the small hand no one was ever meant to read. Meridian. Crest. I had spent 2 days telling myself I was here for information. That was true the way the surface of a thing is true. Underneath it was something I had carried so long I had stopped feeling its weight. The way you stop feeling a ring you have worn for 12 years until the day someone tries to take your hand. Someone had built this entire summit. The panels, the press, the founders paraded on stage like debutantes at their own foreclosure to strip a dozen companies down to the studs and sell the copper. and the man funding it had a name I already owned in my ledger. I just hadn't let myself say the whole thing yet. So let me say all of it now. Not to you, you already suspect. To myself, the way you say a thing out loud in any room to find out if you can still stand while it's true. 12 years ago, I built a company called Aster. I was 25, and I was good. I want to be careful with that word because it is the word they later took from me and bent into a joke, but I will say it plainly. I was good. Aster was a genuinely excellent thing. It solved a real problem for real people, quietly, without theater. We had customers who wrote us letters, actual letters, about what it had saved them. We had a team of 9 who worked at 6 in the morning, not because anyone made them, but because the work was the kind you didn't want to leave. We had a co-founder situation that most people never get once in a life, and I had it at 25. Someone who saw the same thing I saw and built toward it beside me without needing to be the one holding the pen. His name doesn't belong in this account. He gave it up when everything else went, and I will not spend it here. We had a room the size of a 2-car garage above a print shop, and it smelled of the toner from below and the burnt coffee we made too strong, and I have paid a great deal of money since to sit in rooms that smelled worse. I knew the name of everyone's dog. I knew which of the 9 took the last train and which walked, and I made sure the ones who walked had someone to walk with. When a customer wrote us one of those letters, I read it aloud, standing on a chair, because a thing that good deserves a witness. I am telling you this so you understand what was taken. Not equity, not a personalities. A room where 9 people did the finest work of their lives at 6 in the morning because the work was worth being early for. We were about to raise. Good terms, great terms. The kind that come along when the numbers are undeniable and the founders are unfrightened. I had 2 clean term sheets and a third circling. I remember the feeling of it precisely because it is the last time in my life I felt it. The feeling that the world was fair, and that building an excellent thing was enough, and that the reward for doing the work well was that you got to keep doing the work. I have not felt it since. I have felt many things that resemble it from the outside. Power, safety, the cold satisfaction of a position closing exactly where I set it. But not that. That one they took clean and kept. Then Victor Thorne walked into the room. He didn't come as a villain. Villains announce themselves. Predators announce their patience. He came as a believer. He came with the warmth turned all the way up, the star investor, the one whose name on your round meant you'd arrived. And he told me Aster was the most exciting thing he'd seen in a year, and that the terms I'd been offered were, and I remember the word, sloppy. Undersold. That real conviction capital, smart capital, would value us properly. He was backed then by a fund I didn't fully understand the shape of, run by a man named Alfred Stone, whose money moved behind Victor the way a current moves behind a swimmer, invisible until it pulls you under. I should have counted his teeth when he smiled. My grandmother would have. June Brooks ran a hardware store the size of a train car for 31 years. Nails by weight, keys cut while you waited, the smell of cut metal and machine oil that I could still find in a lineup of 1,000 smells. She taught me the whole of what I know that matters. And she taught it to me in one sentence, standing behind a counter worn pale in the shape of her own 2 hands. You find out what a person's worth when they think the deal is already done, not when they're courting you, not when the price is still moving. After, when they believe the paper is signed and the room is theirs and you are already in their mind, furniture. That's when the real face comes out. She'd seen it 100 times over a countertop, in men who were charming while they were buying and something else entirely once they thought they'd bought. I nodded when she said it. I was 9. I did not understand that she was handing me a blade to keep for later. I didn't keep it close enough. Victor Thorne made me believe the deal wasn't done yet, that the good terms were the trap and his terms were the rescue. And so I never got to see the after until I was standing in it. Here is how you steal a company from someone who built it well, if you are patient, and you have crest money behind you, and no shame at all. You do not attack the company. That's amateur. You manufacture a crisis around it. Victor's people found the one enterprise customer who represented too much of our revenue, and through a quiet conversation I only reconstructed years later, gave them a reason to pause their renewal. Nothing dramatic, just a whisper that the company's footing was less certain than it looked. A suggestion to wait and see. A single delayed contract, at exactly the wrong moment in a raise. Suddenly, the undeniable numbers had a crack in them. Suddenly, the clean term sheets got quiet. And into that engineered silence, Victor stepped, grave now, concerned, a friend in a hard season, with the only offer left standing, a bridge, a rescue round. To steady the ship. The ship was never taking water. He'd told everyone it was, and then arrived with the pump. The bridge came with terms I was too frightened and too tired and too 25 to fight. A valuation cut so deep it was a different company at the bottom of it. A liquidation stack that put him first and me nowhere. Board seats that flipped control with a math I didn't see until it was arithmetic instead of theory. I was handed the papers and told to sign fast and not read twice. "You're distressed," they said gently. "The way you say it to make it true. You're too close to it. Founders always are." I signed. I had a team of 9 and letters from customers and a co-founder who trusted my judgment, and I signed the thing that ended all of it. Because the man across the table had spent 3 months making me believe the deal was already done, and I never once checked his teeth. The down round closed. Control moved. And then the after arrived, exactly as June promised it would. Within a season, I was pushed out of the company I had built, bought out at a number that was an insult wearing the costume of a payment, pennies, and not many of them, for a thing that had been the whole shape of my life. My co-founder went when I went. There was nothing left worth staying for once the founder's provisions we'd written to protect the team were the first things struck. The 9 were restructured. The letters from customers stopped mattering to anyone but me. And Victor Thorne put his own name on the front of the thing, the way you'd stencil your name across the side of a ship you'd holed and salvaged and repainted, and stood at a conference not unlike this one and called it his. That would have been survivable. People lose companies. It is a brutal, ordinary thing. What was not survivable was the second half, the part he did not need to do and did anyway, because a predator who is also patient does not leave prey that can rise. He got me blacklisted, not with an accusation. Accusations can be answered. With an atmosphere.
Clara Brooks.
Brilliant, but a fluke, honestly. Difficult. Unstable between us. Unfundable. Whispered into the right ears at the right dinners, the same instrument he'd used on the customer now turned on me, and just as untraceable. I walked into rooms for a year with a genuinely excellent new idea and watched the temperature drop 3 degrees before I opened my mouth, because someone had gotten there first and turned me, in advance, into a story that had already ended badly. You cannot out-argue an atmosphere. You can only leave the room. There is a particular cruelty in it that took me years to name. He didn't need the second half. He had the company, the control, the name on the door. The blacklisting was not strategy. It was maintenance. You don't burn the field you've already harvested unless you want to be sure nothing grows there again, unless the possibility of my rising was, itself, the thing he could not tolerate. That is the part I finally understood, on some later milk crate in some later corridor. A man like Victor Thorne doesn't fear your company. He fears your recovery. He had to make sure the story of me ended on the page where he wanted it to end. Because a founder who loses everything and then does not disappear is the one witness who can ever say, out loud, what really happened in the room. So he made sure I disappeared. And for a while I obliged him. I lost my company. I lost the name I'd made, worse than lost it, had it inverted, made into a warning. I lost the partner who'd built it with me. He took a salaried job at a company he didn't care about and stopped answering the way people stop answering when your face has become a photograph of the worst year of their life, and I do not blame him, and I have never once picked up the phone, because some debts you pay by leaving them alone. I lost the belief, the specific one, that doing the work well was enough. I was 26 and I had nothing, and the thing I remember most clearly is not rage. It's how quiet it was. No one shouted at me, no one had to. They just one by one decided I was no one. And once a room decides you're no one, you get to watch exactly who they are, because they stop performing for the furniture. You can't see who someone really is until they've decided you're no one. I learned that at 26, in the after, with the blade my grandmother gave me finally in my hand and no one left to use it on. I did not break loudly. I want to be honest that this was not nobility. Loud breaking is a luxury for people who have somewhere soft to land, and I had a milk crate, and a folded apron, and a name that opened no doors. So I broke quietly, the way a hairline fracture in a beam breaks, invisibly, and holding. And when I could stand, I did the only thing left that was mine. I decided to find out what I was worth at 6 in the morning, when everyone who mattered had decided the deal was done and gone home. I built a fund. I built it the way June cut a key, by hand, to fit exactly one lock, without a word to anyone about what the key was for. I had no name to raise on, so I built one no one could attach to me. I placed the first capital as an anonymous limited partner in someone else's deal, and I was right. And I did it again, and I was right. And slowly, over years, in complete silence, the anonymous money became a shape the market learned to fear before it ever learned to name. They called it Halcyon. Halcyon's lead. Halcyon's principal, identity sealed, counsel of record, and nothing else. A signature that closed rooms, and a person no one had ever met. I made sure of that. I had learned precisely what a name is worth when the wrong people know it, so I kept mine off the paper and put my whole self into the paper anyway, in the one place they'd never think to look. The terms. There is a clause I write. I've written it into every Halcyon term sheet for 10 years. A founder protective provision no one else bothers with because it costs the investor a little and protects the builder a lot. The exact provision that was struck from Aster first, the one that would have saved my 9. The market started calling it the Brooks Clause, without ever knowing there was a Brooks. My grandmother's name, hidden in plain sight in the machinery of every deal I touched, a signature only I could read. I signed my whole life across those documents in a language the men who erased me couldn't decode, and they respected it, and they feared it, and they never once suspected the hand. That is who I am. That is the thing you now know, and they do not. The anonymous principal of Halcyon Capital, the quiet money this entire summit spent 2 days trying to impress, the sealed signature every deal in that ballroom requires to close, is the woman they told to fill the glass to the line and try not to hover. And I did not stop at building the fund. I want you to understand the patience of it because it frightens me a little to lay it out. Over the years, quietly, through Halcyon and through entities that led nowhere near me, I acquired things. Not companies, positions, debt, leverage, a slice of a fund here, a note there, a quiet controlling interest in the paper of the very people who had ruined me, purchased in ordinary daylight while they thought they were dealing with a faceless institution. I bought the ground they were standing on, 1 square foot at a time, and I never let them see me do it, because the after is the only place the truth comes out, and I had all the time in the world to wait for their after. You will ask why I never acted. 10 years is a long vigil. I have asked myself the same thing at a great many 2 in the mornings. The honest answer is more than one thing. Part of it was penance. Though I'm wary of that word, I signed those papers. No one held the pen. I was young and frightened and lied to, and none of that unsigns a signature. And I made myself sit with that for a long time before I let myself be righteous about anyone. Part of it was the grade. I gave myself 10 years to become someone who could do this cleanly, with paper, not poison, with the truth, not an atmosphere, the opposite in every particular of what was done to me. If I was going to end a man, I was going to do it the way June would have, over a counter, in daylight, with the receipt in my hand. And part of it, the part I like least, was simply that I was afraid. Not of them. Of the day I'd have to walk back into a room like the one they took Aster in and set the picture down. So I waited for a reason that would leave me no choice. And I built the bait. Lantern is my company. Mine, under my own name, the only place in the world Clara Brooks, founder, still appears, deliberately, a small, honest light I lit and left burning in the open. It is a good company. That matters to me. I would not risk a bad one. But I built it in part, knowing what it would attract. A founder-led company with strong bones, and a founder the market still whispered was difficult, that is exactly the carcass this kind of predator circles. I set a lantern in the window of the exact house they'd come to rob, and I waited to see who came up the walk. And they came. All of them came, to one summit, one ballroom, one signing, drawn in by a light I lit myself, to gut a dozen companies, including mine, never once suspecting that the broke, whispered about founder they'd invited to pour water was the buyer of last resort, holding the only signature that could let any of it close. I gathered them. That is the truth I sat with on the milk crate. I built the room they thought they built. And then, on the founder's floor 2 days ago, I saw Aisha Khan turn down a term sheet that would have made her rich and hollowed her company, quietly, when no one who could reward her for it was watching, and something in my chest that I keep very cold went briefly, dangerously warm. Because I knew her. Not her name, her. 25 and good and careful with the word the way I had to learn to be. The same gift. The letters from customers kind of company. The same clean terms circling, the same unfrightened numbers. And, standing 3 feet behind her with a pitcher in my hand, I could see the whole machine already moving to do to her precisely what was done to me. The manufactured crack, the concerned rescue, the fast signature, the atmosphere, the after. Young Clara, reborn on the same floor, walking the same walk toward the same door, and every soul in the room who could stop it either sharpening the knife or, like David, standing at the back carrying the old guilt of having said nothing the last time. I graded her that afternoon the way I grade everyone, in the small ledger I keep and no one reads. One word in the column beside her name. Pass. I have written that word for 2 days beside a handful of names and its opposite beside more of them, and I have learned not to feel much when I do it. But I felt something writing hers, because a grade of pass for Aisha Khan is worth nothing if she is stripped and erased before anyone with power ever reads it, which is the entire lesson of my life. I was a pass too once. It did not save me. The grade is meaningless without a hand willing to enforce it, and for 12 years I have been building in silence exactly that hand. I have been Aisha. I know exactly which room they take you into. I could draw it. The long table, the concerned faces, the water glass sweating a ring onto the term sheet, and exactly how quiet it is in there, and exactly how it feels to sign the thing that ends your life while a man tells you gently that you're too close to it to see clearly. She is not signing it. Not while I'm holding the water. Somewhere down the corridor, an ice machine dropped its load with a sound like small applause, and I closed the notebook over the 2 names, and I understood that the 10-year vigil was over, not because I'd chosen the hour, but because the hour had finally chosen me. I had told myself for a decade that I might never move, that owning the paper was enough, that the quiet was its own kind of justice. It was not enough. It had never been enough. It had just been safe. Victor Thorne put his name on the company that ended my life. Tomorrow he planned to sign away a dozen more. He was not getting one more signature without mine. Chapter 4. The Buyer. A summit is a machine for making decisions look like conversations. The real work never happens on the main stage, under the good lights, where the founders pitch and the cameras roll. It happens in the small rooms off the corridor, the ones with a single round table and a jug of water going warm, where 3 people who already know the answer perform the ritual of arriving at it. I knew this because I had spent 2 days walking in and out of every one of those rooms carrying a tray, and not one person in any of them had ever looked up long enough to see me leave. That was the job, not the water. The water was the disguise. 11:40 p.m. The last panel had ended hours ago. The ballroom was dark except for the exit signs and the blue standby glow of the projector David hadn't shut down yet. Upstairs, in the summit's private suites, the lights were still on, and men who had spent the day talking about founders were now, without founders in the room, talking about what they actually planned to do to them. I had a pass card that opened the service corridors. I had a cart. I had an apron the color of nothing. I had, most of all, the single greatest asset in any room where power is deciding your fate. I was assumed to be furniture that walks. You can't see who someone really is until they've decided you're no one. They had decided. I had let them. So I went to work. I started where the truth is always thickest, the printer trays and the shredder bins. People are careful with their mouths and careless with their paper. In the business center off the mezzanine, the shared printer had a job stuck in its memory that no one had claimed, and in its output tray, face down under a stack of blank sheets, were 4 pages someone had printed and thought better of collecting. I turned them over the way you turn over a card you already suspect. They were not summit materials. They were a term sheet. Not one of the founder-friendly ones the summit had been advertising all week, the ones with the warm language about partnership and runway and founder alignment. This one had none of that. This one was written in the flat, surgical grammar of a roll-up. 12 companies listed by internal code, not name. A single acquiring vehicle. And across the top, in the corner where the drafting firm's watermark should have been, a name I had spent a great deal of money over a great many years learning to recognize on sight. Meridian Growth Partners. I stood very still in the business center at 11:40 at night and read the whole thing twice, the way I had been told to read term sheets fast and once, 12 years ago, and had never made that mistake again. Here is what the summit was actually for. The public story was a founder-friendly investment summit, a 2-day gathering to celebrate builders, to connect promising early companies with patient capital, to hand out a founder's prize on the final morning like a benediction. That story had a press list, a stage, a chairman, and a photographer. It was a very good story. It was a cover. The real deal was a mass roll-up. Meridian would acquire not one company but a dozen at once, all of them structured to close on the same morning, all of them lowballed to the exact price at which a tired founder with no other offer signs. Buy the companies cheap. Keep the technology, which was the only thing anyone had ever wanted. Gut the teams. Fire the builders, the engineers, the designers, the 2 people and a dream who had made the thing worth stealing in the first place, and call it restructuring for scale. Strip the tech out, fold it into a portfolio, and let the names of a dozen companies quietly disappear into a single line item on a fund report. I had seen this shape before. I had lived inside it. 12 years ago, it had a company's name on it, and the company was mine, and it was called Aster. What I was holding now was the same crime, drafted by better lawyers, run not once but a dozen times in a single dawn. I made a copy. Then I put the original back in the tray, face down, under the blank sheets, exactly as I had found it. Because a thing you have seen is a weapon only if no one knows you've seen it. I wheeled my card out and I graded the printer's owner, whoever he was, in the private ledger I keep and no one is allowed to read. Fail. 12:20 a.m. The suites were where the paper became people. I know the architecture of these hotels the way a surgeon knows an abdomen. There is always a service pantry connecting the top-floor suites, a narrow galley with a coffee station and a pass-through so that staff can refill a room without walking through the front door. From that pantry, with the espresso machine running to cover the quiet, you can hear a great deal. Nobody lowers his voice for the person restocking the sugar. Arthur Sterling was in suite 1204. Arthur Sterling, the summit's organizer, the managing director of the host firm, the man whose warm baritone opened every morning session with a line about the courage of founders. He was on the phone, and he was not warm. The steering's done, he was saying. The best 6 are pointed exactly where they need to point. Aisha's company, the 2 out of the accelerator, all of them. They think Meridian is one bidder among several. There are no others. I made sure of that. A pause. My number hasn't changed. 2 points of the aggregate, wired to the entity we discussed, closing morning, not before. Another pause, and then, lower, the sentence that turns an organizer into a defendant. You're not paying me to run a summit. You're paying me to make sure the only buyer in the room looks like a crowd. A kickback. 2 points of the aggregate deal value, paid privately, to steer the summit's best startups to a single buyer while dressing it up as an open market. Arthur Sterling wasn't hosting a celebration of founders. He was a fence, and the founders were the goods. I refilled the sugar. I graded him again, and the grade was the same, because a man only earns a fresh grade when he does something to change it, and Arthur had spent 2 days proving he never would. Fail. In writing this time, I thought. Someday soon, in writing. Sophia Reyes was in the pantry when I came out, not to work, never to work, but to take a call where the suites couldn't hear her. Head of Investor Relations, Victor's enforcer, the one who called me the water situation to my face and meant it as a category, not an insult, which was worse. It's handled, she was saying into her phone. The narrative's clean. Founder first, community, the whole warm bath. Nobody's reading the term sheets, they're reading the room. She laughed, short and expensive. No, the founders don't know. That's the point of the founders. They're the set dressing. You don't tell the set dressing the plot. She hung up and looked directly at me. And for 1 full second I was sure, the way you're sure of a stare in the dark, that she had actually seen me. Then her eyes did the thing they always did. They slid off. I was the water situation. I was handled. I was set dressing too, in her arithmetic. And set dressing doesn't hear. You find out what a person is worth at 6 in the morning in an empty ballroom, when the cameras are off, and the only witness is the one refilling the water. But you find out almost as much at midnight in a service pantry, when they think the machine is running to make espresso, and it's actually running to cover the sound of them saying the true thing out loud. Sophia Reyes, complicit, informed, and comfortable. Not the architect. But she'd read the blueprints and hung the curtains and told herself the curtains were the whole house. Fail. With a flinch coming, I wrote in the ledger, because I had watched her all week and I had seen the one thing that separates a Sophia from a Arthur. When the truth landed, she'd be the first to move. I filed that. I file everything. 1:05 a.m. Victor Thorne's suite was the one I'd been circling all night, and I saved it the way you save the thing you most want and least trust yourself around. Victor Thorne, the star, the shark everyone wanted in their cap table, the public face of the summit, the man the founders lined up to be devoured by, because in this business, being eaten by the right shark is called a milestone. Signature line, delivered to journalists like scripture. A company is worth exactly what someone will pay for it, and not 1 cent of what it's worth. 12 years ago, Victor Thorne had put his name on my company. Tonight I was carrying his coffee. His door was cracked. Inside, 2 voices, and the second one I didn't recognize, and the not recognizing was itself information, because I knew every voice that mattered in that building, and this one had arrived without my noticing, which meant it had arrived on purpose. Overexposed is a strong word, Victor was saying, in the tone of a man to whom overexposed was exactly the right word. It's the accurate word. The second voice was younger, smoother, unhurried in a way that costs money to learn. Your fund is carrying 3 positions that should have been written down 2 quarters ago. You need this roll-up to close more than any founder in this building needs it not to. Let's not pretend you're doing anyone a favor, Victor. You're the most motivated seller in the room. You just happen to be sitting on the buyer's side of the table. Silence. Then Victor, quieter, all the shark gone out of him. It closes. Arthur has the founders where they need to be. Your father would have. Don't. The younger voice cut it clean. Don't tell me what my father would have done. I've read the file. I know exactly what my father did. I intend to do it better. I stood in the corridor holding a tray of coffee that no one had ordered and felt the floor of 12 years reorganize itself under my feet. Your father. Meridian Growth Partners. The younger voice, smooth and unhurried, and reading from a file that started before he was old enough to sign it. Alfred Stone had bankrolled the theft of Aster. Alfred Stone's money had funded the manufactured crisis, the rigged down round, the blacklist that turned my name into a warning. Alfred Stone was the quiet capital behind the crime that ended my first life, and Alfred Stone, I had confirmed years ago, was dead. But his fund was not dead. His playbook was not dead, and his heir was in Suite 1109 telling Victor Thorne he intended to run it better. Julian Stone, managing partner of Meridian, son of the man who had paid to erase me. Here, in person, to buy a dozen companies the way his father had bought one, cheap, gutted, renamed, filed away. The same crime, the same family, the same money, run again at scale, as if the first time had gone so well it deserved a sequel. I did not go into the room. I set the coffee tray on the service ledge outside the door, softly, so that later they'd find it and assume some anonymous hand had left it, which was true. Then I went down the service stairs, all 12 flights, on foot, in the dark, because the elevator has cameras, and I needed a few minutes where nobody, not even a lens, was looking at me. By the second landing, my hands had stopped shaking. By the 6th, I had a plan. By the 12th, I had a ledger entry with a blank grade beside a name, waiting to meet the man before I filled it in. 5:50 a.m. I met him at 10 minutes to 6, in the empty ballroom, because of course I did. That is where you find out what a person is worth. The setup crew wasn't in yet. I was resetting the room for the final day, squaring the chairs, laying fresh water at every seat along the head table where the flagship deals would be signed, wiping the sweat rings off the mahogany where yesterday's glasses had left their pale ghosts. The fluorescent work lights hummed overhead. The service cart wheel squeaked its one bad wheel. It was the hour the summit belonged to me and the builders and no one else, the hour before the powerful arrived to pretend they built it. The doors opened, and Julian Stone walked in alone. I knew him before he said a word. He had his father's economy of movement, nothing wasted, nothing warm. Younger than I'd expected and better dressed than he needed to be, a man who had never once in his life wondered whether a room was his. He crossed the ballroom toward the head table as if he were inspecting a property he already owned, which, in his arithmetic, he was. He stopped a few feet from me. He looked at the head table. He looked at the water glasses I'd just filled to the line. He did not look at me. And then, he did the thing. He shrugged his overcoat off his shoulders, a long, dark coat, the kind that costs more than a founder's monthly runway, and held it out to the side, into the air, in my direction, without turning his head. Not a request, not even a gesture at me specifically, a gesture at the room, at the category of person who stands in a room like this at 10 to 6, confident that the category would produce a pair of hands. I took the coat. Of course I took the coat. A weapon you have not yet decided to use looks exactly like obedience. They ready? He said to no one, meaning the founders, meaning the deals, meaning the dawn he'd bought. The room's ready, sir, I said, in the flat voice of the help. He nodded, still not looking, and walked the length of the head table, trailing one finger along the mahogany, and I watched Julian Stone count chairs the way his father must have counted them. One company, one company, one company, each seat a name about to be filed away. When he reached the end, he turned, finally, and looked at me for the first time, and the look was not curiosity. It was inventory. "You've been on this floor all week," he said. It wasn't a question. He'd noticed the furniture after all, not who I was, only that the same piece kept appearing. "You hear things. People forget you're standing there." "I pour water, sir." "You do." He came closer and lowered his voice, and here it was, the quiet threat, delivered so gently it could pass for advice. "Let me tell you how these 2 days end, so you don't get any ideas about the things you've heard. On this floor, information is inventory, and inventory belongs to whoever's holding the paper. I'm holding the paper. Whatever you think you overheard in a hallway is worth exactly nothing, because the only people who could act on it are the people who wrote it down. Do you understand what I'm telling you? A person in an apron who starts repeating things she misheard doesn't get believed. She gets replaced. Quietly. Before lunch." He smiled, and it was his father's smile, generous and total and empty. "Keep pouring the water. It's the one thing in this room you're actually holding." Then he took his coat back out of my hands, again without really seeing the hands, and folded it over his arm and walked out to go be smooth at the founders he intended to gut. I stood alone in the empty ballroom at 4 minutes to 6, with the fluorescent lights humming, and the one bad wheel of my cart ticking as it settled, and I finished the ledger entry I'd been carrying down 12 flights of stairs. Julian Stone, managing partner, Meridian Growth Partners, son of the man who paid to erase me. Same crime, same money, second generation, no remorse, no imagination, only appetite. Hands his coat to a person he has decided is no one. Threatens the powerless because he has never once been in a room where the powerless turned out to hold the paper. But he was wrong about one thing, and it was the thing everything else would turn on. The only people who could act on what I'd heard were the people holding the paper. And Julian Stone did not know, could not have known, because I had spent 10 years making certain no one could know who actually held the paper on Meridian's leverage, on Victor's failing fund, on half the deals set to close in that room at 9 sharp. I held it. All of it. Through a fund with a sealed principal and a council of record no one had ever traced, through a founder protective clause in every term sheet I'd ever written that a careful reader would have recognized as a signature. The Brooks Clause. It was in the paper on Meridian's own credit line, if anyone had thought to look, because they had borrowed, somewhere up the chain, from money that was quietly mined. Julian Stone had walked into a room he thought he owned and handed his coat to the person who owned it. "Fail," I wrote, line by line, when the time comes. In front of the press you invited. 6 a.m. I finished the water. I squared the last chair. I stood at the head of the ballroom in the gray light before the crew arrived, and for one moment I let myself feel the whole shape of it, the summit, the cover, the roll-up, the dozen companies, the second generation of the same family running the same crime, the coat still warm from a stranger's shoulders where it had lain across my arm. And I thought about Aisha Khan, 26 years old, A first-time founder with a real product and a clean heart, and the specific, dangerous gift of not yet knowing she was supposed to be afraid. All week she'd been doing the thing that made her a threat. She'd been talking to the other founders, comparing term sheets, asking why the founder-friendly language kept dissolving into surgical grammar when the room emptied out. Yesterday, she'd sat down with a business journalist, a real one, a careful one of the few the summit hadn't hand-picked, and I'd watched her lean across the table and start, quietly, to add things up. I hadn't been the only one watching, because that was the last thing I'd heard, coming down out of the pantry, in the seam between Sophia's call and the stairs. Arthur's voice, low to Sophia, "The Nair girl is organizing. She's got half the founders asking questions, and she's got a reporter's ear. If she stands up on that stage tomorrow and says the word roll up in front of the press, the whole close comes apart." And Sophia, without a flicker, "So she doesn't stand up. We find something. Every founder's got something. We make her the problem before she can make us one." They had decided Aisha Khan was a problem to be removed. A young builder, gifted and honest and inconvenient, to be discredited and disqualified and erased before dawn. Exactly the way I had been erased 12 years ago, quietly, cleanly, before lunch. I had decided something else. I had decided Aisha Khan was the future, the one clean thing in a building full of surgical grammar, the builder who still believed the thing was worth what it was worth and not 1 cent less, the heir to the company they took from me and the values they never could. They looked at Aisha and saw a problem to solve. I looked at Aisha and saw the whole point. One of us was about to be proven right. Chapter 5. The Frame. A frame is a quiet thing to build. It does not announce itself. It is assembled the way a term sheet is, clause by clause, in a room with good lighting and bad intentions, by people who believe anything written on letterhead becomes true the moment it is filed. I had watched a frame built around me once, 12 years ago, too young and too proud to understand that the paper was the weapon and the meeting only theater. I understood it now. So when they began to build one around Aisha Khan, I did not stop. I let them. 11:40 p.m. The summit's second day had folded into that hour when a hotel stops pretending to be a place of business and becomes a place of nerves. The founder's floor had gone dark. The investors were in the club lounge on 11, laughing the specific laugh of men who have decided a deal is already done. And I was where I always was when things mattered. Nowhere. A service cart, a stack of clean glasses, a badge that said Marsh, temporary, in a font designed to be forgotten. They never wondered why the temporary help was always there. That was the whole of my advantage. You can't see who someone really is until they've decided you're no one. And they had decided I was no one on the first morning before I poured a glass. The breakout room they used was 9C, the small one Arthur Sterling booked for logistics. I had reset it 4 times a day for 2 days. I knew its shredder, crosscut, the kind that turns a page into confetti and a confession into nothing. I knew its printer, a leased machine with a hard drive that remembered every job it ever ran because leased machines always do. And I knew that at this hour, the door to 9C was propped with a folded coaster because the latch stuck and Sophia Reyes hated waiting for a keycard. I brought fresh water. Nobody asked me to. That was the point. Sophia had her laptop open and her heels off, which told me she meant to stay a while. Arthur stood at the printer with his sleeves pushed up, performing labor he had never done. Between them on the table lay the architecture of the thing they were making. Metrics or leak, Arthur said. Can't run both. 2 scandals on one founder reads like a vendetta. One reads like discovery. Leak is cleaner, Sophia said, not looking up. Faking metrics, she brings in an auditor, drags it out 3 weeks. We don't have 3 weeks. We have until the signing. A leak we resolve internally, tonight, on our timeline. She breached the confidentiality annex, section 11, the data room NDA every founder signs on intake. We produce evidence she pulled sealed deal terms out of the data room and passed them to that journalist she's been feeding. Jola. Arthur said the name like a stain. The business one. Aisha's been walking her the founder's side of the story for 2 days. Which is exactly why it's plausible, Sophia said. You don't invent a crime nobody would believe. You take the true thing she's doing, talking to a reporter, defending the founders, and move it 1 inch. She talked to a reporter, true, She leaked sealed terms to her. False. The true part carries the false part. Nobody checks the inch. I stood at the sideboard, filling the pitcher, and wrote her a grade in the ledger I keep where no one can read it. Sophia Reyes. I had graded her fail on the first morning for calling me the water situation to my face. But there is failing, and there is this. The articulate cruelty of a person who understands exactly how truth works and uses that to counterfeit it. She was not stupid. Stupid would have been forgivable. She was precise, and she aimed her precision at a 29-year-old who had done nothing but refuse a bad deal and be kind to people the room ignored. Kind to me. Aisha had told Sophia 2 mornings ago that the catering staff are people, and they can hear you. That was her real crime. She had noticed the invisible, and in that room, noticing the invisible was the one unforgivable act. Fail. Line by line. I underlined it. So how does it reach her? Arthur asked. The data room logs every access. If we say she pulled the terms, there has to be a pull. There will be. Sophia finally looked up. Her intake credentials are still active. The summit issued them. The summit can use them. You log in as Aisha Khan at a time she can't cleanly account for and export the sealed term summary. Then it's in her access history. Then it's real. That's her login, not her hands. It's her login. That's all the charter requires. Section 11 doesn't ask who typed. It asks whose credentials. She said it the way you note the weather. Then we print the export, let Yola's name appear in the metadata, and walk it to the ethics committee at 7. You, me, and Victor's proxy, and vote her out before the signing. Disqualified for cause. She loses her seat, her company loses its defender, the founders lose the one person telling them not to sign. Clean. On our timeline. Arthur exhaled. Victor signed off? Victor doesn't sign off on plumbing. He wants the drain to run. This is the drain. They were good. I will grant them that. Elegant the way a well-drafted down round is elegant, each part load-bearing, engineered so that when the founder wakes up ruined, every step will have been technically legitimate. I knew the shape of it because I had lived inside it once. They had done exactly this to me 12 years ago in a room like this. Different names, same clause architecture, same inch. And here is what 12 years teaches you. You do not knock over a frame while it is being built. A half-built frame is deniable. An overreach caught early, walked back, buried under a settlement. You want the whole thing. Finished, signed, dated, filed. Every one of them committed in writing, in their own login, in their own hand, to the exact crime, so that when you set it in front of the room, there is no inch left to move. You do not stop the noose. You hand them the rope, admire the knot, and let them fit it to their own necks. So I refilled the water. I set the fresh pitcher at Sophia's elbow, exactly to the line she liked, and she did not look at me, and I memorized the screen over her shoulder, the credential override field, the timestamp she was choosing, 10:52 p.m., a window when Aisha had been, I happen to know, in the founder's lounge with 11 witnesses. They were even sloppy about the alibi they were framing her into. Good. Sloppy is a gift you save. Arthur printed the export. The leased machine hummed and remembered. 2 copies. He kept one. The other, the draft with the wrong footer, before Sophia told him to strip the internal routing header, he fed to the cross-cut shredder without a second glance, because to men like Arthur Sterling, a shredder is not a machine, it is an absolution. You put the sin in the top, and it comes out the bottom as nothing, and your hands are clean. His hands were not clean. I emptied that shredder every night. The bin of it was in my cart already, the confetti of every draft they'd ever regretted. And cross-cut confetti reassembles, slowly, on a large table, by a person who has spent 10 years being patient, into exactly the document someone believed was gone. I had a table. I had the patience. I had, God help them, nothing but time. Kill the intake credential after, Sophia said, gathering her heels. Log the override out, and someone reset this room before morning. The girl does the rooms, Arthur said, meaning me, not looking at me, the way Julian Stone had handed me his coat without looking. The reflex of a man to whom the help is a fixture that occasionally moves. It'll be done by 6. It would be. I would do it myself. I would reset that room to a shine, and I would take with me the printer, or at least what the printer knew. 1:15 a.m. The founder's floor had a supply closet the summit used for AV staging, and the AV staging was David Flynn, the only person in that building who, when I came through a door at 1 in the morning, said, "You should be asleep, sharp one," and meant it as care. "So should you," I said. "I don't sleep at these." He was coiling cable the way old hands do. Over-under, no kinks, a craft nobody notices until it's done wrong. 30 years of ballrooms. You learn the building breathes different at night. Somebody's always up doing the thing they don't want done in daylight. He glanced up. "You're up." "I'm resetting 9C. He knew what happened in 9C. Not the specifics, but the smell of it. The way a man who has stood at the back of 100 rooms knows when a deal goes from business to burial. He set the cable down. "Can I tell you something," he said, "that I've told exactly no one?" It wasn't a question. It was a man deciding at 1 in the morning that the temporary catering help was safe to bleed on, because I was leaving in a day and would take his confession into the anonymous nowhere he thought I lived in. "You can tell me anything," I said. The truest thing I'd said in 2 days. Years ago, 12, maybe more, I've stopped counting on purpose. I ran the room for a board meeting. Young founder, first company, good company, actually good, which you don't often see. And the money in the room had decided to take it from her. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the cable in his hands, at the craft. Same play they always run. Manufactured a crisis, forced a down round, wrote her out clause by clause while she sat there thinking it was a negotiation. And I ran the slides, keyed the video that made the case she was unstable, was the word, difficult, a fluke. His jaw worked. I knew it was a lie. I could see her doing the math a beat behind, the way you do when the room's moving faster than fair. She was so smart, and they were counting on her being too smart to believe people this cheap would go this far. And I said nothing. I keyed the next slide, because I had a contract for the season, and the firm gutting her booked 40 rooms a year, and a man's got to eat. The picture was in my hand. I had filled it without noticing. My hand, the one with the scar across the base of the thumb, the burn from June Brooks's soldering iron the summer I was 9, learning to fix a lamp switch behind the hardware store, did not shake. 10 years of not shaking. I had built the not shaking the way I built the fund, brick by brick, in the dark, where no one could see the labor. "What happened to her?" I said. Past tense, as if I did not know, as if I had not spent 12 years becoming the answer. "Gone." He shrugged, and the shrug was the guilt, the whole of it, the way a man packs a grief into a gesture so he can carry it. They blacklisted her. Unfundable. I heard the word in a hallway for years after, and every time I knew I'd helped write it, one slide at a time. She never surfaced. People like that, the ones with the real gift, they don't always come back. Sometimes the room takes it and keeps it, and the person just stops. And you keyed the slide. He finally looked at me, and there was something in his face I had not braced for. "You remind me of her." I don't know why I said that. It's the way you watch a room, like you're reading a cap table upside down across the table, taking in the whole shape of the con before anyone says a number. Whoever you were before this apron, you weren't nobody. I could have told him. There was a full second, I will not pretend there wasn't, where the whole 10 years leaned toward that door. He had confessed his part in my execution to my own face, not knowing it was my face, and every cell in me wanted to set the picture down and say, "David, look again. You keyed the slides at Aster's board meeting. I am the founder." I did not stop. I became the money that owns this building, and I have come back for the pen. I did not say it. Grief is not the same as strategy, and I had spent a decade learning to tell them apart. If I told David tonight, I would have a witness who loved me and could not lie well, and by 7 a.m., Sophia would smell it. The reveal was a counter-signature I would place at exactly one moment in exactly one room, and this was neither. But I let myself give him one true thing. "She didn't stop," I said. He looked at me. "I don't know her, but I know the kind. The room takes the company. It doesn't get to take the person unless the person agrees, and the real ones never sign that clause. Whatever the room said about her, she didn't stop. She just stopped letting you see her." I set his water down to the line. "You should sleep, David. Tomorrow's a long room." "You're a strange one, sharp one." But something had loosened in his shoulders. "You'd have liked her." I think I would have, I said, and went to reset 9C. 3:40 a.m. Nia Adebayo found me at the long table in the back-of-house pantry, the shredder bin emptied out in front of me, and 41 strips of cross-cut confetti aligned into a document that was, by then, 3/4 of Arthur Sterling's fingerprints in paper form. She had come to help me flip the ballroom. She stopped in the doorway with 2 coffees going cold in her hands and looked at what I was doing, and I watched her stop being tired. Nia had been my friend on this floor for 2 days, and, in the way of catering floors, my friend for life. Sharp, funny, quicker than the room ever credited her, exactly the kind of person the room decided was no one, and thereby told everything. She set the coffees down and looked at the reassembled page, the summit letterhead, the sealed roll-up term summary, the credential override header Arthur had shredded and I had rebuilt. She looked at the way I read it. Fast, from the corner, the whole shape at once, my scarred hand flat on the table anchoring the strips. "You read that like you own it," she said slowly. "I'm just—" "No." She pulled out the chair across from me and sat, her voice dropping under the hum of the walk-in cooler. "Clara, I've watched you for 2 days. You pour water like you're checking a meniscus. You reset a room and I swear you're auditing the exits. You looked at Julian Stone's coat when he handed it to you like you were pricing the buttons. And nobody reassembles a shredded deal doc at 4 in the morning because they're temp catering." She reached into her apron and turned her phone face up on the table, and on the screen was a photograph she had gone looking for. A press photo, the kind that runs above a founder profile in a business quarterly, 12 years stale. A younger woman at a whiteboard, mid-sentence, mid-belief before the room. The caption, even at that resolution, legible. "Clara Brooks, founder of Aster." "That's you," Nia said. "That's you before. Aster. I remember Aster. Everybody in tech remembered it for about a year, and then everybody was told to forget." Her eyes came up to mine, not accusing. They were doing the thing that undid me, that I had not let anyone do in 10 years. Seeing me. "They said you were finished. And you're pouring their water." A long breath. "Why, Clara?" I could have lied. It was most of what a decade in the dark had taught me. But you find out what a person is worth at 6 in the morning in an empty ballroom, when the cameras are off, and the only witness is the one refilling the water. And Nia had been that witness to me for 2 days without knowing it. And she had graded me kind at every hour I could have been cruel, and wasn't. And a grade like that is a debt. "Because the pen the whole summit needs," I said quietly, "is mine." She didn't understand yet, so I told her the word. Halcyon. I watched it land. I watched her run the cap table of the last 2 days in her head, every Halcyon's lead, every hushed reference to the sealed principal whose signature every deal required, and arrive at the only chair nobody had thought to check, the one holding the water pitcher. "You're Halcyon," she breathed. "You're the—" She pressed her hand to her mouth. "They've spent 2 days terrified of you, and you've been refilling their coffee." "I've been grading their coffee manners." I turned the reassembled page toward her. "And they just tried to frame a 29-year-old for a leak she didn't commit, to strip her company before dawn, using the same playbook they used on the woman in that photo. As Halcyon's principal, I have summit-level access nobody knows I have. The data room logs, the credential override trail, the security footage of who was in 9C at 10:52 tonight when Aisha supposedly pulled those terms. All of it. And I'm not going to use any of it yet." "Why not?" "Because a frame you interrupt is a misunderstanding," I said. "A frame you let them finish is a confession. They vote her out at 7. Write it down, sign it, file it. Every one of them on the record, committed to the exact lie. And then, I aligned the last strip of Arthur's page. Then I hand it back in front of the people they invited to watch them win. I don't stop the noose, Nia. They tie it beautifully. I just make sure that when it drops, they're the ones inside it." Nia looked at the photograph of the woman I used to be, then at the woman across the table, and picked up her cold coffee and drank it like a toast. "Okay," she said. "What do you need?" "Right hand. That fast." That is what the room never learns about the people it decides are no one. They choose sides in 4 seconds, and they are the best allies alive, because they've been reading the whole con from the cheap seats the entire time, and no one ever asked what they saw. "Be exactly what they think you are," I said. "Invisible. in every room, watching, same as me. I slid her the reassembled page. And I need this photographed, time-stamped, and somewhere they'd never think to look, anywhere near the catering staff. She grinned, and for the first time in 10 years, I was not alone in the dark with it. The one place they'd never search, she said, is one they don't believe has anything worth taking. Pass, I said, and meant it as the highest grade I keep. Nia Adebayo. Pass. We flipped the ballroom together as the windows went from black to the bruised gray that is a hotel's version of dawn. 200 chairs, squared to the tables. The signing table at the head of the room, where in a few hours the founders would be told to sign away the things they had built. I walked the room the way I walk every room, from the corner, reading the whole shape of it at once. The press risers at the back, the seat reserved for Halcyon's sealed lead investor that everyone assumed would sit empty until a representative arrived, the ethics committee packet already printing upstairs with Aisha Khan's name and the word disqualified in a font designed to look like justice. At the head table lay the flagship deal, the roll-up. Meridian Growth Partners on the cover in confident type. Julian Stone's fund. Alfred Stone's playbook, a dozen founders' companies bound inside it like pressed flowers. And on the last page, the counter-signature block. Blank, awaiting the one signature the whole architecture required. Halcyon's principle. They had built the entire summit as a machine to extract a signature from a person they had never bothered to see. They had spent 2 days impressing an empty chair, and they had scheduled the extraction for the first clean hour of morning when the deals would close and the founders would be gutted and the frame around Aisha would already be law. David's confession was in me. Nia's photograph was in her apron. Arthur's shredded page was reassembled. Sophia's override sat in a log only I could read. Every strand was in my hand, and not one of them knew whose hand it was. I filled the last picture to exactly the line. They were going to close the deals at dawn. Dawn was the deadline I had spent 10 years refusing to meet. Chapter 6. 6 in the morning. The call came at 1:40 in the morning, and I heard it because I was emptying the wastebaskets in the executive suite corridor, and a man who thinks he is alone talks on the phone like the walls are his employees. "Move it up," Arthur Sterling said on the other side of a door left cracked for a room service tray he'd already forgotten. "I don't care what the schedule says. We sign the flagship before sunrise. Get the founders in a room, get them tired, get them scared, and get the pens out before anyone's lawyer is awake to answer the phone." I stood in the hallway with a bag of shredded paper in my hand and did not breathe. I had spent 10 years teaching myself to hear a deal the way a sailor hears weather, the drop in pressure before the thing you cannot see arrives. This was that drop. They had decided not to wait for the final day. They were going to take the flagship deal, the one built to swallow Lantern and Aisha's company whole, structured so cleverly around a single anonymous fund's money, and close it in the dark, while the only people who would fight it were asleep, or locked out, or too frightened to be brave at 2 in the morning. You find out what a person is worth at 6 in the morning in an empty ballroom, when the cameras are off and the only witness is the one refilling the water. That was always my thesis. But the villains had their own version. You find out what you can take from a person at 6, because that is the hour when people sign things they would never sign at noon. I tied off the bag and went to work. 1:58 a.m. The summit's flagship deal had a name so bland it was almost a confession. Project Continuity. Continuity of what, they never said. Not the companies, not the teams. What continued was ownership, flowing out of the hands that built and into the hands that bought, cheap, at the exact moment the builders were too exhausted to read the fine print. I knew the deal better than the men selling it because I had read the part they hadn't. Here is what Arthur Sterling did not know, what Victor Thorne did not know, what Julian Stone, holding his coat over my arm 2 days ago without looking at my face, most certainly did not know. Project Continuity did not have its own money. Roll-ups rarely do. Meridian had the ambition and the leverage and the appetite, but the capital that made the flagship close possible, the bridge that let them buy a dozen companies in a single dawn, came in through a syndicate anchored by a lead fund, whose participation required a counter-signature from its sealed principal before a single dollar moved. The lead fund was Halcyon Capital. The sealed principal was me. They had spent 2 days trying to impress Halcyon's lead investor, building the whole summit as a stage to court that silent signature. And they had structured their overnight raid on top of my money because they thought Halcyon was a faceless institution that would rubber stamp anything with a good IRR, and had no idea the fund they were leaning on for their bridge was owned entirely and quietly by the woman refilling their water. You can't see who someone really is until they've decided you're no one. They had decided I was no one and built their trap on my foundation and never looked down to see whose foundation it was. I could stop it with a phone call. That was the terrifying, luminous fact I held. One instruction to my council of record, and the bridge froze, not dramatically, not with my name attached, just the quiet institutional cough of a lead investor exercising a routine hold pending review. Project continuity would seize like an engine with the oil drained out, and no one in that building would know the hand that did it. I did not make the call yet, not because I doubted it, because I had spent 10 years learning the difference between stopping a thing and catching the people doing it, and those are not the same act. A frozen deal is a delay. A frozen deal with every one of them fully committed in writing, on the record, in front of the press they had invited, that is a verdict. But there were people in this building who could not wait for a verdict. Aisha could not. The founders could not. So my first move that night was not the freeze. It was buying them the hours. 2:20 a.m. Aisha Khan was not supposed to be in the building. They had disqualified her the day before, a manufactured scandal, a planted accusation that she had leaked confidential deal terms, executed by Arthur and Sophia with the clumsy confidence of people who have never been caught because no one who could catch them was ever watching. I had watched. I had the shredded original of the memo they forged, and the data room logs showing the leak had come from Arthur's own credentials at 11:04 p.m., time-stamped, immutable, in a system I happened to control. I had all of it, and I was saving all of it, because a card played early is a card wasted. But Aisha did not know I had it. She only knew she had been branded a liar and marched out of a summit she had done nothing but believe in, and that somewhere in this hotel, her friends were being herded toward a table in the dark. So she came back. Of course she came back. That was why I had graded her pass on the first morning, when she thought no one was looking and stopped to help a junior founder carry his boxes. She came in through the loading dock, because that is where the invisible people go, and she had learned, the way the powerless eventually do, that the invisible doors are the only ones nobody guards. She nearly ran into my cart. "You," she whispered. She knew my face, the catering girl, the one she'd picked 2 days ago when Sophia called me the water situation. "They took my badge. I have to warn them. They're moving the signing. Tonight." "I know," I said. She stared at me. There is a particular way a young, honest person looks at you when the world has just proven itself as ugly as they feared, and they are deciding whether to become hard or keep going soft and get hurt again. I had made that decision once, 12 years ago, and chosen wrong. I had chosen the shell. I was not going to let her make it in a loading dock at 2 a.m. "The room's on 9, I said. "Executive boardroom, east side. They've got the founders coming up one at a time, so nobody can talk to anyone else. That's the trick, isolation. You want to fight it, you don't go through the front. You go up the service stair with me and get in that room before they do, so the founders see a face they trust before the pens come out." "How do you know all that?" I looked at her. 10 years of practice deciding things in rooms where no one saw me, and here was the one person in the building I wanted to say all of it to. Not yet. "Because I refill their water," I said. "A water pitcher is furniture that walks. They say everything in front of me. Come on." 2:41 a.m. David Flynn was fighting the same fire from the other end, with the only weapon a veteran operations man has, the logistics. I found him at the 9th floor A/V closet, doing something slow and deliberate to a patch panel. He had run these rooms for 30 years. He knew that a signing built for speed depends on 100 small things working, and that a man who has spent his life making those things work can also, if his conscience finally demands it, make them stop, quietly, deniably, with a shrug and a, "These old systems, you know." "The boardroom's booked till 9, he told me, not turning around. "Suddenly at midnight it's booked from 3. The system doesn't like a double booking. Might take the whole floor's displays down for a bit while I sort it out. Signing tables do love a working screen." He allowed himself the ghost of a smile. Founders can't be walked through terms they can't see, can they? You're stalling them. I'm having equipment difficulties, he said. Then, quieter, the thing under the thing. There was a founder, years ago, a young woman. They took her company apart in a back room while I stood in the corner minding the cameras, and I never said a word, because the contract was worth more to me than she was. I've carried that a long time. He turned and looked at me, and something passed over his face, the recognition he could never place. You remind me of her. I don't think I could stand to watch it happen twice. He had run the AV for Aster's doomed board meeting 12 years ago. He had watched them take my first company apart, and he did not know that the woman he was buying hours for tonight was the same woman he had failed to speak for then. The irony sat in my chest like a stone I had learned to carry. Someday I would tell him, not in a hallway at 3 in the morning with a deal to break. Buy them an hour, I said. 1 hour. I only need one. You? He said. What can you do? More than you'd think, I said, from behind a picture. 3:10 a.m. They got the founders into the room anyway. David's outage bought 35 minutes, not the hour, and Arthur Sterling was not a man who let a broken screen stop him when there was cheap money to be made. He had them read the terms off printed pages under the fluorescent hum. 6 founders around a table, gray-faced. Each told the others had already agreed. Each told this was the only offer, and it expired at dawn. I was in the room. Of course I was. I came in behind the room service cart with the coffee they'd ordered to keep the founders awake and pliable. Set out the cups, poured, became furniture, and listened. It's a fair number, Arthur was saying, in the warm, regretful voice men use when they are stealing from you and want you to thank them. Given the market, given the circumstances. He did not name the circumstances, that he had spent 2 days manufacturing a panic and a scandal to make the number look fair. Sign tonight and the transition is clean. Your teams are protected. Their teams were not protected. I had read the real appendices, the ones in the data room I controlled. The teams were a line item marked efficiency realization. The word for what they meant to do to the builders was sunset. Aisha came in then through the door David had propped, in her gray hoodie with no badge, and she stood at the head of the table where they could all see her, and she said, "Don't sign. Whatever they told you, don't sign it tonight. Read it in the morning with your own lawyer. That's all. Just wait for morning." The room froze. Arthur's face did something ugly and fast before he smoothed it. This person has been removed from the summit for cause. For telling the truth, Aisha said. Same reason I'm getting removed twice. She looked around at the 6 exhausted faces. You know me. You know I don't lie. Something is wrong with a deal that can only be signed while everyone's lawyer is asleep. Ask yourself why it can't survive daylight. It was a good line, better than she knew. And I watched the founders waver, the terror of losing the offer against the deeper terror in their gut that the offer was a trap, and saw it could still go either way, because fear is a strong drink, and Arthur was pouring it faster than Aisha could pour the truth. So I made my first move. 3:22 a.m. I did not do anything visible. That was the whole art of it. I set down the coffee pot, stepped into the corner where the water was, took out my phone the way any tired catering worker checks the time at 3 in the morning, and sent 4 words to a counsel of record who has never in 10 years failed to act on 4 words from me. Halcyon hold. Continuity bridge. Somewhere, in a system none of these men could see, a lead investor exercised a routine review hold on the syndicate bridge. No name, no drama, just the quiet institutional fact that the anchor capital behind Project Continuity was, as of 3:22 a.m., not available to fund pending the principal's review. The deal did not die. It seized. And within 90 seconds, the way these things always travel, a phone buzzed on the table, and Arthur Sterling looked down at it, and I watched the color go out of his face. The first honest thing his face had done in 2 days. There's a hold on the financing, he said, and hated saying it. Halcyon's flagging a review. It's nothing, procedural. It'll clear by morning. It would not clear by morning. It would not clear until I decided it cleared. But he did not know that, because to him, Halcyon was an institution, and institutions clear their holds. And it never once occurred to him that the hold had a face, and the face was 6 feet away, filling his water glass to exactly the line. That was the thing they never understood about power. It does not raise its voice. It does not walk into a room. It changes one number in a system nobody thinks to look at, and the loud men feel the floor tilt and cannot find the hand that tilted it. Without the bridge, there was nothing to sign tonight. The number Arthur had sold as final and expiring evaporated into procedural and by morning, and the founders, who had been about to sign out of fear the offer would vanish, now watched it vanish on its own, and understood in their bodies before their minds caught up that Aisha had been right. A deal that can only be signed in the dark cannot survive the light being turned on even a little. Arthur adjourned it. He had to. He dressed it up. Let's reconvene when the paperwork's clean, no sense rushing. But everyone heard the truth under it, and one by one the founders gathered their coats and did not sign. Aisha caught my eye across the room, not understanding what had just happened, knowing only that something had, and that the catering girl had been standing very still in the corner while it did. Pass. I wrote in the ledger no one can read, next to Aisha's name again. Pass, next to David. And I let myself have one held breath of something almost like joy, then put it away because the work was not done. 4:05 a.m. I stood in the service pantry off the 9th floor while the building slept off its failed ambush, and I took inventory the way my grandmother June used to on the 1st of the month. Not for the tax man, she said, but so you know exactly what you've got before you decide what it's worth. You find out what a person's worth when they think the deal is already done, she told me once over a cash drawer. I have built a fund on that sentence. Here is what I had. I had Arthur Sterling's kickback, the arrangement steering the best startups to Meridian, documented in a payment trail through a shell he'd been sloppy enough to route through the summit's own vendor account, because men who have never been audited get lazy about the plumbing. I had the forged scandal against Aisha, the shredded memo reassembled. The logs showing the leak came from Arthur's credentials at 11:04 p.m., the footage of Sophia at the printer at 11:01. Enough to unruin a young woman's name in front of the same press that had helped ruin it. I had the Meridian roll-up documents, project continuity in full, the appendices marked efficiency realization, and sunset, the gut the team's machine dressed as a rescue. I had the paper trail tying Victor Thorne and the late Alfred Stone to the original theft, Aster, 12 years ago, the rigged down round, the blacklisting. The same fund, the same playbook, now aimed at a dozen more companies through Alfred's son Julian. A generational crime with a receipt. And I had the last thing, the one that made all the others detonate, the Brooks Clause. The founder protective provision I have written into every Halcyon term sheet for 10 years, elegant and unmistakable. A structural signature no other fund writes, sitting right there in the bridge documents, because they had built their raid on my capital and never noticed my fingerprint was on the money. That, plus Halcyon's sealed counsel of record, was proof of the single fact that would end all of them at once. The anonymous principal they had spent 2 days courting, the silent signature every deal in the building required, was not coming to countersign their crime. She had been in the room the whole time, refilling the water. I had everything, and so I made the only decision left, the coldest and cleanest of the 10 years I had spent getting ready to make it. I let them sign. 4:40 a.m. Not tonight. Tonight I had frozen. But a stall is not a verdict, and I did not want a stall. I wanted the whole room to see it. So I would let the freeze quietly clear, enough at least for appearances, and let them reconvene the flagship signing on the final day, exactly as they had planned, in the grand ballroom, in front of the invited press, with the chairman calling for Halcyon's principal to come forward and countersign. I would let them get all the way to the pen, because a deal broken in a dark boardroom at 3 in the morning is a rumor. A deal broken in a bright ballroom at 9, in front of every camera they had invited to celebrate their theft, each villain fully committed on the record, that is a reckoning. I had waited 10 years. I could wait 5 more hours to do it right. Let them gloat. Let them stand in the ballroom and take their bow and reach for the pen and hear the chairman say the name of my fund out loud into a microphone. And then let the woman with the water pitcher set hers down. I put the ledger away and picked up the pitcher. There was one more thing to witness. Because the last thing you learn about people before you finish grading them is what they say when they think they've won. 5:30 a.m. They grease in Victor Thorne's suite before dawn to congratulate themselves on a raid that had not actually happened. Men toasting a victory they had merely postponed, because the wanting felt like the having. Victor poured. Arthur and Sophia were there, and Julian Stone, smooth and unhurried, the coat I'd held 2 days ago now on his own arm. I was there too because someone had to bring the ice and the glasses and refill the water, and that someone was furniture that walks. To the final day, Victor said, lifting his glass. The financing hiccup clears by morning, the founders come back hungry and grateful, and we sign in the light where it looks respectable. Cleaner. To finally clearing out the dead weight, Arthur said, and buying cheap. They drank. And Victor Thorne, who 12 years ago put his name on the company that ended my first life and did not remember doing it, said the line he always said, the one I had been waiting 2 days to hear him say one last time before I inverted it in front of the world. A company is worth exactly what someone will pay for it, and not 1 cent of what it's worth. Julian Stone smiled at that, the way you smile at a thing your father used to say. My father believed the same, he said. He proved it once, on a little company, Aster, I think it was called, made a fortune on the founder being nobody. He did not look at me. He never did. He held out his empty glass into the air where he assumed a servant would be. Water, no ice. I filled it to exactly the line. I graded them there, silently, all 4, the way I grade everyone, not for what they did to me, but for who they were when they thought the deal was already done and the only witness was no one. Fail, 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 fail. Line by line, the ink drying while they laughed. You find out what a person is worth at 6 in the morning when they think the cameras are off. It was almost 6. The room was not empty, but it might as well have been, because the only other person in it was invisible, and she was writing all of it down. They scheduled the closing for 9 sharp. They had no idea the buyer of last resort had been refilling their water for 2 days. Chapter 7. Halcyon. 9 sharp, the invitation said, and at 9 sharp the grand ballroom was fuller than I had ever seen it. They had struck the breakfast tables and rolled out rows of gilt chairs, and every chair held someone who believed the morning belonged to them. I stood at the side of the room with a water pitcher, the way I had stood for 2 days, and I watched them fill the space with their certainty. The front rows were the raiders. I knew them now the way you know a hand you have played against for years, the small tells, the way a man checks his cuffs before he lies. Behind them, the invited press, cameras capped and notebooks open, there to write the story they had already been handed. A new era for founders, a summit that saved the little companies by selling them to people who knew what to do with them. And in the back, packed against the doors where the air conditioning didn't reach, stood the founders, the builders. Aisha Khan was not among them. They had disqualified her at dawn, and the empty space where she should have been standing was the loudest thing in the room, if you knew how to hear it. I knew how to hear it. That was the whole trick. You find out what a person is worth at 6 in the morning in an empty ballroom when the cameras are off and the only witness is the one refilling the water. And I had been refilling their water since the ballroom was dark and empty and mine. I had graded every face in the front 3 rows. I had the ledger closed in my chest, and this morning I intended to read it aloud. At the head of the room stood a long table draped in white, and on the table sat the closing folder. The flagship deal. A dozen companies bound into one instrument, the roll-up that would take Lantern and Aisha's company and 10 others and feed them into a machine built to strip them for parts. The signature pages were tabbed with little colored flags. Every flag was somebody who had built a thing at 6 in the morning when no one was buying. Arthur Sterling took the stage first, because Arthur always took the stage first. He had the microphone the way a man holds a thing he believes he owns. What a morning, he said, and the room warmed to him, because he was charming, and charm is the oldest fraud there is. 2 days ago, we made a promise. We said this summit would be different. We said we'd put founders first. I filled a glass at the press table to exactly the line and stepped back into the wall. And today, Arthur said, we keep that promise. The Founders Prize, the flagship close, a structure that gives these companies what every founder dreams of, A partner with the capital and the discipline to take them where they could never go alone. Discipline. That was the word for it now. When Alfred Stone ran this same play 12 years ago on a company called Aster, the word had been vision. The vocabulary changes. The knife is the same. Victor Thorne sat in the center of the front row with his legs crossed and his chin lifted, waiting for his cue, and I watched him arrange his face into humility the way a man arranges flowers he did not grow. He would take the stage after the signing. He would frame the whole thing. A new era for founders, he had told a journalist that exact phrase yesterday, by the coffee station, with me standing 18 inches from his elbow holding a carafe, because a carafe is furniture that walks. He never looked at me. None of them ever looked at me. You can't see who someone really is until they've decided you're no one, and they had all decided, thoroughly, that I was no one. Julian Stone sat 2 seats down from Victor. He had handed me his coat at the door an hour ago without turning his head, the way you hand your coat to a hook. It was folded now over my arm. I had graded him the first night when he called the roll-up clean-up to a man who laughed. Fail. His father's grade, inherited whole. Sophia Reyes stood near the head table with a clipboard, running the room, and there was a tightness at the corner of her mouth this morning that hadn't been there yesterday. She kept glancing at the empty space where Aisha should have been. Small thing, I noted it. Arthur brought it around. So, without further delay, let's bring these deals home. Managing partner of Meridian Growth Partners, the architect of this new chapter, Julian Stone, would you come sign us into the future? Applause. Julian rose, unhurried, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the long white table. He uncapped a pen. He turned the folder to the first tabbed page. Lantern, my company. My name printed under a valuation that would have insulted a photocopier. And the cameras rose, and the room leaned in to watch a signature erase 12 years of somebody's life. He signed. The pen moved across the line, and the room exhaled a soft, satisfied sound. And I felt the old thing move in me, cold and level, the thing I had built instead of a scream. He turned to the second page, Aisha's company. He signed that too. Third page, fourth. The cameras clicked. The founders in the back stood very still, watching the future they were about to be cut out of arrive in a folder they weren't allowed to touch. Let him sign. I had decided that in the dark 2 nights ago. Let him sign every page. A signature is only worth the paper it obligates, and I owned the paper. Julian reached the last tab and set the pen down, and the room began prematurely to clap. Arthur lifted a hand for quiet because there was one more thing, the formality. The seal on the whole instrument, and Arthur loved a formality the way he loved a stage. There is, he said smiling, one final signature. As many of you know, the lead capital behind these transactions comes from a fund that prefers to keep its own counsel, a quiet partner. The principal has always stayed sealed. That's the arrangement. That's always been the arrangement. He let the mystery flatter the room. But every deal in this room requires their counter-signature. So, he turned toward the doors, toward the anteroom where a representative was meant to be waiting. Halcyon's principal, will your representative come forward to countersign? The room turned with him, toward the doors, toward the wrong place. I set the water pitcher down on the service table. It made a small sound, glass on cloth, the kind of sound no one in that room had ever once turned to look at. But the room was silent now, waiting for a door to open. And into that silence the small sound landed, and a few heads turned, irritated, reflexive, toward the catering girl who had dropped something. I laid Julian Stone's coat over the back of a chair. I straightened my borrowed vest, and I crossed the room. I did not hurry. I walked up the center aisle between the raiders and the press, and I felt the confusion come off them in a wave. A server, walking the wrong direction, walking toward the head table, walking as though the head table were hers. Sophia stepped forward to intercept me with her clipboard and her tight mouth, and I looked at her, once, and she stopped. She stopped the way you stop when some old animal part of you recognizes the ground shifting before your mind has caught up. I reached the long white table. I picked up the pen Julian Stone had set down, still warm from his hand. And I picked up the microphone from its stand, and I turned to the room that had spent 2 days looking straight through me, and I let them look at me now. Halcyon's principal, I said, sent no representative. The sound in the room changed. You would have to have stood in it to understand. 1,000 small certainties cracking at once. Halcyon's principal is holding the water pitcher. I set the pen down on the closing folder deliberately over Julian's fresh ink. My name is Clara Brooks. I own the paper on half the deals in this room, and I have been grading all of you. Nobody moved. Arthur's smile was still on his face, orphaned there, a smile that had lost the man behind it. Victor Thorne had gone very still in the center of the front row, and I watched him do the arithmetic, the name, the face, the 12 years, and I watched him fail to make it come out to anything he could survive. For 2 days, I said, you have been trying to impress Halcyon. You have straightened your ties for a fund. You have lowered your voices when you thought its principal might be listening. Its principal was listening. Its principal was refilling your coffee. You told me things in front of a water pitcher that you would not have told your lawyers, because a water pitcher is furniture, and furniture doesn't testify. I let that sit. I kept a ledger. Let me read it, line by line. I turned first to Arthur, because Arthur was closest and Arthur was easiest. Arthur Sterling. He flinched at his own name in my mouth. 2 days ago, you stood on that stage and promised this room you'd put founders first. Yesterday, in the 4th floor breakout room, you accepted a wire, routed through a consulting shell you set up in April, in exchange for steering the summit's best companies to Meridian at valuations you knew were theft. I have the wire. I have the shell. I have you on the summit's own security feed, shaking the hand that paid you. I did not raise my voice. I never raise my voice. That is the luxury of holding the paper. You didn't put founders first. You sold them by the pound and took a commission. Fail. 2 people had come in through the side doors while I was speaking, quiet, dark suits, the summit's own security director, and a woman I had retained who did not work for the summit at all. They took up positions at the ends of the head table. Arthur saw them. The smile finally left his face entirely, and what was under it was not charming at all. Sophia Reyes. She had gone white. This morning you disqualified Aisha Khan from this summit for leaking confidential deal terms. Aisha Khan leaked nothing. The document that framed her was assembled on Tuesday night on a workstation in the organizer's suite, printed on the suite's own printer, and slipped into the data room with a backdated timestamp. I have the print logs. I have the shredder. You should teach the junior staff to shred twice. I paused. But I also watched you flinch twice this morning at an empty space in the back of a room. So I will say only this. You helped build the frame, and you can help take it apart. And which of those you're remembered for is still, for the next 30 seconds, up to you. Her eyes went to Arthur, then to Julian, then to the floor. She set the clipboard down on the table. It was not much, but she flinched first. And in a room like that one, the first person to flinch is a fault line. I turned to the center of the front row. Julian Stone. He met my eyes, and to his credit, he did not look away. And to his discredit, there was still contempt in it, still the man who hands his coat to a hook. Whoever you think you are, he began. I know exactly who I am, I said. The question that should be keeping you up is whether you know what you signed. You signed a roll-up designed to buy 12 companies at fire sale terms, gut their teams within 90 days, fire the people who built them, and asset strip the technology into your other holdings. You called it cleanup. I heard you. I let the word cleanup land in front of the press, in front of the founders in the back. It is the same play your father ran, Alfred Stone. 12 years ago, his fund bankrolled the theft of a company called Aster, manufactured a crisis, forced a rigged down round, seized control, pushed the founder out for pennies, and had her blacklisted so she couldn't be heard from again. The same playbook. You just industrialized it. Instead of one founder at a time, a dozen at once, with a press list and a prize. I looked at the tabbed folder under his ink. You inherited a knife and thought it was a birthright. Fail. Now the personal thing. I had held it for 12 years and I would not rush it now. I turned to Victor Thorne. He was on his feet. I don't know when he had stood. His face had found, at last, an expression it could hold. The calm of a man reaching for the line that had always saved him. A company, he said, and his voice was almost steady, is worth exactly what someone will pay for it, and not 1 cent of what it's worth. That's not theft, Ms. Brooks. That's a market. I know your line, Victor. I've had it read to me. 12 years ago, you had it read to me across a table while you took the thing I built. I stepped toward him, and the microphone came with me. You manufactured the crisis. You forced the down round. You put your name on my company, and you pushed me out for the price of the office chairs. And then, because a founder who talks is a liability, you made sure no one would fund me again. You called me unfundable, unstable, a fluke. I stopped 3 feet from him. I want you to say its name. He didn't. You buried it so well you almost buried it from yourself. 12 years. You've told the story of that acquisition 100 times on 100 stages, and you have never once said the name of the founder, because the name is the crack in the story. My voice did not rise. It went down to the register that empties a room. Say the name of the company you stole. Say it. His mouth opened. Nothing came out of it. In the whole ballroom, there was not one sound. The cameras were up now, every one of them, red lights, and the press had stopped writing the story they'd been handed and started writing the one that was actually happening. Victor Thorne stood in the center of the front row with his acquisition and his myth and his failing overexposed fund, and he could not make his mouth say the word Aster, because the word Aster was a door, and behind the door was me. You can't, I said quietly. I know. I couldn't say it either for a long time. That's what you do to a person when you steal the thing they made. You make the name of it unspeakable in their own mouth. I turned so the room could see my face and not just the back of my vest. So I'll say it, since it appears I'm the only one in this room who can. Aster. That was the company. I was the founder. My name is Clara Brooks, and I did not go quietly. I went quiet, which is a different thing, and a more expensive one for the people who mistook the first for the second. Then I turned my back on Victor Thorne, which was its own kind of sentence, and I put my hand flat on the closing folder. Because a reveal is a feeling, and a feeling fades. What doesn't fade is what you sign. And I had not walked to this table to make a speech. Now, I said, the paper. I opened the folder to the last page, past Julian's signatures, to the counter-signature line, the one the whole instrument dangled from, the sealed line that made all his ink real. I held it up so the cameras could see the block of legal text above it. This is Halcyon's Council of Records seal. It's on every deal in this room, because Halcyon is the lead capital in every deal in this room. And this, I ran my finger up the page to a clause the Raiders' lawyers had grumbled about for 2 days without ever asking who wrote it. This is the Brooks Clause, a founder protective provision. I've written it into every term sheet Halcyon has ever issued, because I promised myself once, in a room where I'd just lost everything, that if I ever held the pen, I would never let happen to anyone else what happened to me. There is exactly one person on this earth who writes that clause. You've been reading her handwriting for 2 days and calling it the fund. I picked up the warm pen. And instead of countersigning, I drew a single line through the signature block, corner to corner. And the sound of the pen on the paper was, I think, the most satisfying sound of my life. Halcyon withdraws its capital from this roll-up, effective now, which means Julian's signatures are ink on a deal with no money behind it. I looked up at Julian Stone, and I watched the arithmetic hit him the way it had hit Victor. You didn't buy 12 companies this morning. You spent 2 days closing a deal that was never yours to close, on money that was always mine to pull. And there's more, because I don't do things by halves. I learned that lesson from your family. Meridian's roll-up is leveraged. I know how it's leveraged because Halcyon holds a senior position against it through Meridian Growth's own credit facility. I've already instructed my counsel to call that leverage. As of 9:40 this morning, Meridian Growth Partners cannot fund the very obligations it walked in here to celebrate. Julian Stone sat down. He didn't decide to. His legs decided for him. I turned to the doors at the back and lifted my voice for the first time, just enough to carry over the packed heads to the builders pressed against the wall. Someone bring Aisha Khan back into this room. She was never disqualified. She was framed, and I have the proof, and she is reinstated as of right now. Movement at the back, a door, and then Aisha was there, wide-eyed, walking the aisle the founders made for her, and I watched the founders' faces as she passed. Watched hope do the thing hope does, catch and spread, and I held the folder up and tore the flagship closing straight down the tabbed spine. The roll-up is dead, I said. Every one of these 12 companies is now the subject of a new instrument, Halcyon's. drafted, waiting, signed by me before I put this vest on this morning, that reterms these deals in the founder's favor. Fair valuations, founder control retained. The Brooks Clause in every one. Your teams stay. Your technology stays with you. The companies stay with the people who built them. Effective now. I set the torn folder down. That's the deal Halcyon actually came here to do. The only one it was ever going to countersign. For one heartbeat, nothing. And then, from the back of the room, from the builders, a sound. Not applause, not yet. A rising. The founders were coming off the wall, standing straighter, some of them with their hands over their mouths, and the sound they made was the sound of people who had walked into a room to be buried and were walking out owning the shovel. The front rows did not rise. The raiders sat in their gilt chairs with the arithmetic on their faces. Arthur Sterling was being spoken to, quietly, by the woman in the dark suit who did not work for the summit. Sophia Reyes had picked her clipboard back up and was holding it against her chest like something to hide behind. And when I caught her eye, she gave the smallest nod, and I understood she had made her choice about which things she'd be remembered for. Victor Thorne stood alone in a room that was, cell by cell, ceasing to be his mouth still holding a name it would not release. I stepped back from the table. I picked the water pitcher back up off the service cart because it was, in the end, the only thing in that ballroom I had ever actually carried, and it felt right in my hand. David Flynn was at the back by the AV board, staring at me with an expression I would understand fully only later. A man watching a door open onto a thing he'd carried guilt about for 12 years, not yet knowing it was the same door. Nia caught my eye from the service line and pressed 2 fingers to her temple in a small salute and mouthed one word. Pass. I looked out at all of them, the risen and the seated, the graded and the graders, the ones who had told me to fill the glass to the line and not hover. For 2 days I had been furniture that walked. For 12 years I had been a name too dangerous to say. This morning I was neither. I had spent 2 days learning their faces. Now, for the first time, they learned mine. Chapter 8. What the Room is Worth. Nobody in that ballroom moved for a long time, and I let them not move. Silence is a room's most honest currency. You cannot buy the particular stillness of 200 people recalculating everything they thought they knew about who had been standing at the edge of their morning with a pitcher in her hand. I let it settle before I said another word. Then I set the pen down on the head table, parallel to the edge of the folder, the way I set down a water glass, and I began the part that was not theater. Justice, done right, is not a fire. It is an audit. A fire asks no questions. An audit reads every line and lets the numbers say what they were always going to say. I had come to make the paper true. It had been lying for 12 years. 6:41 a.m. The summit's own counsel stood at the side door with 2 people from the state securities office I had asked, quietly, weeks earlier, to keep the morning open. Arthur Sterling saw them before anyone else did. He had the organizer's instinct for the exit. He always knew where the doors were, which was its own kind of confession. Arthur, I said, and my voice carried without my raising it, because I had learned that the quietest voice in a room is the one everyone leans toward. You took a fee to steer the best companies at this summit into a slaughterhouse and call it a rescue. There's a wire. There's a second set of books for the placement fees. There's a message thread where you called the founders inventory. The fee isn't even the crime the regulators care about most. It's that you certified this summit as founder-friendly to every investor in this room while you were paid to make it the opposite. That's fraud. The kind with a statute number. Arthur Sterling had spent the summit being charming at podiums and cruel in hallways, and the distance between those 2 men had always been the measure of him. I had graded him fail in the first hour of the first day when he told a junior founder to smile more, you're not funding yourself, and told me to be quick about the coffee. There's a good girl. The people from the securities office did not need my grade. They had the wire. But I watched his face when the charm finally had nowhere to stand, and I felt nothing warm and nothing cruel, only the flat satisfaction of a ledger that balanced. He did not get to make a speech. Men like Arthur believe the speech is the point. Taking the speech away is the sentence. Sophia, I said next. Sophia Reyes had called me the water situation. She had called the founders the help's help. She had stood beside Victor Thorne for years, the way an enforcer stands beside a myth, close enough to borrow the light, far enough to survive the fall. When I said her name, she flinched. She had been the first to flinch when the truth landed, and I knowed everything. A flinch is not redemption. But it is the place redemption starts, if there's a person left inside the role to do the starting. You helped Arthur build a scandal out of nothing to expel a founder who was getting in the way, I said. You know the one I mean. Aisha Khan was standing at the back, where the founders always stood, where I had stood, and she went very still. You forged a leak. You planted metrics. You did it because it was your job to keep the story clean, and the story needed her gone. I did not soften my voice, but I did not sharpen it either. You're finished here. Your name comes off the letterhead by end of day. That part isn't a choice. She said nothing then. But an hour later, when the room had cleared, she found me by the service door and put a slim folder into my hands without a word. The originals of the forged leak, the drafts, the message she'd been told to send and hadn't deleted. Proof against the very people she'd protected and against herself. For the founder, she said. Not for me. I know it's not enough. It wasn't. It was also more than anyone else from that side of the room ever did. A flinch that becomes a folder is the closest thing to a pass I could give her, and I gave it quietly, the only way she'd have taken it. I turned to the head table, where the real weight of the morning sat. Julian Stone had not moved. That was the tell. Everyone else had been recalculating. Julian had been calculating from the start, and men who calculate do not startle, they reprice. He looked at me now the way you look at a number that has come in wrong, not with fear, with irritation, as though the market itself had made an error he intended to correct. Meridian Growth Partners, I said, was going to buy a dozen companies this week for the price of their furniture. Gut the teams, fire the builders, strip the technology, and flip the shell. You have a name for it in your own memos. You call it unlocking trapped value. The value isn't trapped, Julian. It's just standing in the back of the room where you decided not to look. You control a fund, he said, the first thing he'd said, and he said it like an accusation, because to him, it was one. That I had been something all along and let him mistake me for nothing. Congratulations, you froze one deal. You can't stop a roll-up. There are 12 LOIs and a bridge facility and... The bridge facility, I said, is Halcyon's. I watched him do the arithmetic. The Meridian roll-up was built on leverage, debt stacked on debt, every acquisition financed against the last, the whole tower depending on a senior creditor who would keep extending because the machine was too big to let fail. I was that creditor. I had been for 18 months, quietly, through 3 layers of sealed counsel, buying the paper on Meridian's own leverage, the way Julian bought the paper on desperate founders. He had never once wondered who the money answered to. I'm calling it, I said. All of it. The senior facility, effective this morning. Every LOI in the roll-up is conditioned on financing that no longer exists. The tower doesn't fall because I pushed it. It falls because you built it on a floor I own, and I'm taking the floor back. I let a little of the 12 years into my voice, just a little. Your father funded the man who stole my company, bankrolled the down round, paid for the blacklist, wrote the playbook you're running right now at scale, buy talent cheap, erase the founder, own the thing they built. Alfred Stone taught you a builder is a cost to be removed from a company you want. I spent 12 years becoming the cost you couldn't remove. The circle closes here, Julian, not because I'm cruel, because it was always going to close on whoever was standing where you're standing. His fund would survive. It was engineered to land its losses on other people. But the roll-up was his monument, his proof that the son had outscaled the father, and monuments are load-bearing for men like Julian Stone. When the tower came down, it would take the myth of the man the money couldn't say no to. He would still be rich. That was fine. I had never wanted anyone poor. I wanted them ordinary. I wanted the market to look at Julian Stone and see a man, not a weather system, which is a worse sentence than poverty for a man who built his life on being weather. He gathered his coat himself this time. I think for 1 second he remembered handing it to a woman with a pitcher without seeing her face, and understood exactly how much a person is worth when you decide they're no one. Then he walked out. He, at least, understood he'd been outbought. There's a kind of respect in that, and I let him have it. because I am not in the business of taking everything, only what was owed. That left Victor. 6:52 a.m. The light in that ballroom at that hour is the same in every ballroom. The fluorescent hum, the toner smell, the carpet still holding the cold of the night crew. I had reset that room before dawn for 2 days. I knew where the light fell. It fell now on Victor Thorne, the star, the shark, the public face, the man who had said to a journalist, "A company is worth exactly what someone will pay for it, and not 1 cent of what it's worth." I had carried that sentence for 12 years the way you carry a stone in a shoe you refuse to take off. He'd said it to me once too, though he didn't remember, in a boardroom with a sweat ring from a water glass spreading across the term sheet that ended my company, and he'd smiled while he said it, and I had signed fast and not read twice because I was 25, and I believed the room was honest. "Victor," I said, "your fund is already gone. You know that better than anyone here, because you've been rating startups cheap all year to cover the holes, and this summit was supposed to be the quarter that fixed it. Halcyon was the anchor on your flagship deal. Halcyon just walked away from the table wearing a service apron." A sound went through the room, not a laugh, something rougher. "Without my capital, your flagship collapses, and your fund's exposure is public by noon. The shark story is over, not because I killed it, because there was never a shark. There was a man drowning quietly and biting everything nearby to stay up." He tried to speak. 12 years of watching him talk his way out of every room had taught me that Victor Thorne's greatest weapon was that he was never without words. So I watched the words fail to arrive, and I understood that I had finally taken the one thing he'd built his life on. It was not money. It was the certainty that he could always narrate the room. "I'm not going to ruin you with the evidence," I said. "I don't need to. The market's going to do it, in public, and you'll have to stand there while it does. Here's the only sentence I want from you." I set the water pitcher down on the head table. I was still holding it. I had been holding it the entire time, and no one had noticed, which was the whole thesis of my life in one image, to the line and no further. 12 years ago, you took a company from a 25-year-old founder. You forced the down round, seized control, pushed her out for the price of the office chairs, and had her blacklisted as unstable so she could never build the thing twice. You put your name on it. You've had your name on it for 12 years. Say the name of the company you stole. "Clara." "Not my name. I know my name. Say the name of the company." The room was so quiet I could hear the service cart out in the corridor, one squeaking wheel, the sound I had been invisible behind for 2 days. Victor Thorne looked at me, and for the first time in 12 years, there was nothing behind his eyes but the naked arithmetic of a man who had spent everything and just been handed the bill. "Aster," he said, louder. "Aster." His voice cracked on it. "The company was called Aster." "Yes," I said, "it was. It was a good company. It was going to be a great one." And then I gave him the sentence, the only cruel thing I did all morning, except it wasn't cruelty. It was just the truth arriving on time for once. "Now you're going to watch my name go exactly where yours has been. Every deal you touched, every founder you buried, every room that repeated your line about what a company is worth, they'll say Brooks now, and you're going to be alive for all of it." That was his sentence. Not a sell, not a headline. The thing men like Victor Thorne fear more than either. To keep existing, in public, while the name they erased is written over theirs, one deal at a time, until no one in any room remembers there was ever a shark. Only a woman who poured the water and turned out to own the paper. He sat down. He did not walk out. There was nowhere to walk to. Every door in that room led into a market that already knew. By 8, the ballroom had emptied of the people who mattered less and filled with founders. They came up out of the back of the room where they'd been standing all week and stood in the front for the front time, and I watched them not quite believe they were allowed to. Aisha Khan reached me first. She had refused a predatory term sheet on day 1 in a hallway when she thought no one was watching, and I had been watching, and I had written "pass" beside her name in a notebook no one was allowed to read. She was young the exact way I had been young, gifted the exact way I had been gifted, one rigged down round from being erased the exact way I had been erased. She was the reason I hadn't just burned it all down in the dark and disappeared. You don't rebuild a thing for 12 years to watch it happen again. You rebuild it so there's someone to hand it to. "Your company's yours," I told her. "Retermed this morning. Founder-friendly with a control provision I wrote myself. You'll recognize it when your lawyer reads it. A clause no one else writes. It protects you from exactly what almost happened to you this week. It's called the Brooks Clause. Now it's got your name on the paper it protects. The deal I never got. You get it. She started to thank me and I stopped her. I don't want to be thanked, I said. I want you to do the thing that actually pays this back. In 10 years, there's going to be a founder standing at the back of some room, gifted and about to be taken apart, and someone will have decided she's no one. I want you to be the one who sees her. That's the only tuition I'm charging. Pass, she said, and she smiled, because Nia had told her about the notebook, and I laughed for the first time in what felt like the entire summit. I stood up the fund that afternoon. I'd had the papers drafted for a year, and left the name blank on every draft because I couldn't write it until it was true. It was true now. The Aster Fund, June Brooks' founder's room. Aster, for the company they stole, restored to the light not as a wound, but as a beginning. The good thing I built at 25, given back its name and pointed at the future instead of buried in the past. And June Brooks, for my grandmother, who ran a hardware store the size of a hallway and taught me the only sentence about business worth keeping. You find out what a person's worth when they think the deal is already done. She was the erased small builder, the neighborhood woman who fixed what came in the door, who knew every customer's name and every screw's size, who never once appeared in any story about what a company is worth. The whole rotten machinery I just dismantled was built on erasing people like June. So I put her name on the door of the room where founders would be protected, and I meant it to stay there long after I was gone. I hung her photograph on the wall myself. It's small, badly framed, my grandmother standing in the doorway of a store that no longer exists, wearing an apron. She wore an apron too. I only understood fully that afternoon that I'd been wearing hers the whole time. Under it, I put one word on a small brass plate, because June would have hated a paragraph. Builder. Nia Adebayo runs operations. That is not a courtesy title. Nia recognized me on day one from an old press photo and a scar on my left hand and the way I read a cap table upside down without turning it. The founder inside the water girl, when everyone else with power in that building looked straight through both, and a person who can see who you really are when you're pretending to be no one is not an assistant. She's the whole security system. She has an office with her name on the door and a salary that made her put her hand over her mouth. And when a founder walks into the June Brooks founder's room afraid, Nia is the first face they meet. A kind face with authority behind it, a combination rarer in this business than money. David Flynn found me at the end of the day, when the room was empty again, the way rooms are empty at the beginning and the end and only pretend to be full in between. He'd been coiling cable, the way he had in ballrooms for decades, the veteran AV man who called me the sharp one, quietly, and meant it. The one insider who'd treated the water girl like a person because to David, everyone standing on a floor he'd wired was a person. He'd told me once, not knowing what he was telling me, about a young founder years ago whose company he'd watched get taken apart in a back room while he ran the sound, and how he'd said nothing to keep the contract and never stopped hearing it. He set down the cable and looked at me for a long moment, and I watched him arrive at it the slow, honest way, the way an honest man arrives at a hard thing. "It was you," he said. "The back room, 12 years ago. The board meeting where they took the company from the girl who wouldn't stop asking questions." His voice was rough. "I ran the sound the day they took your company. I saw your face when you understood what the term sheet meant, and I said nothing. And I've been running these rooms ever since, trying not to remember it." He shook his head. "I never forgot you. I just never knew I was looking at you. Different glasses, different name in my mouth. But I knew you reminded me of her. You reminded me of her because you were her." "I know," I said. "I knew you didn't recognize me. I didn't hold it against you. You were the man who felt bad, David. In that room, 12 years ago, you were the only one in the whole building who felt bad." I looked at him. "I graded everyone I've ever met. You want to know your grade?" "I already know my grade," he said. "I've been giving it to myself for 12 years. "No," I said. "You've had it wrong. You've been grading yourself fail for saying nothing. But you're the only person from that room who's still ashamed, and shame that lasts 12 years isn't a fail. It's the whole exam." I picked up my end of the cable and handed it to him, so we were both holding it. Pass, David. It was always pass. You just needed someone who was in the room to say it out loud. He didn't say anything sweeping. He wasn't a sweeping man. That was most of why I trusted him. He just took the cable and took my hand for a second along with it, an operations man's hand that knew exactly how much weight a thing could hold, and said, "Can I buy you a coffee that isn't hotel coffee?" And I said yes, and that was all of it. And it was enough, and it was earned, and I am not going to make it into more than it was. I kept one habit after that. I could have retired the apron. I own the paper on half a market, and no one would ever hand me a pitcher again unless I asked. I ask. One summit a year, I work the floor. I put on a service vest and a badge that says nothing true, and I refill the water and the coffee, and I get told to be quick about it and not to hover, and I am invisible again for 2 days, furniture that walks. I do it because there is exactly one place in this business where people tell the truth about who they are, and it is not the stage or the term sheet or the press release. It is the empty ballroom before dawn, when they think the deal is already done, and the only witness is the woman refilling the glass. I found out what I was worth there, too. 12 years too late and right on time. I'm not going to forget the address. Victor was right in the end. That's the part I sat with longest. He was right, and I hated that he was right. And then I understood that being right about the mechanism is not the same as being right about the meaning, and that the whole tragedy of a man like Victor Thorne is that he never once noticed the difference. A company is worth exactly what someone will pay for it. So I changed who was holding the pen. I put the worth back where it belonged, not in the sale price, but in the people who build the thing at 6 in the morning when no one is buying and no one is watching. You find out what a person is worth at 6 in the morning in an empty ballroom, when the cameras are off and the only witness is the one refilling the water. So am I. Pass.